We will start the afternoon session today. We are lagging behind by 15 minutes because of the first session we got little extended. Today in the second session we have Dr. Srinidhi. I welcome him on behalf of MIP and all of you. A brief introduction to Dr. Srinidhi. You will be surprised to know Dr. Srinidhi is a medical doctor turned public health academician. He holds MBBS from Bangalore Medical College and PhD in public policy from IIM Bangalore. His primary research interests are in integrative medicine, health policy, and systems research. He has worked in the areas of medical education, knowledge translation, respectful maternity care, and digital health. He is currently an assistant professor and research scientist at Public Health Foundation of India. Srinidhi has been a student of Tattvada for more than 2 decades. He has been learning under Sri Vidyasthi Swamiji of Bhandarkeri Matha, Dr. Vyasankere Prabhanjanachar, Dr. Vedagarpa Sheshgiri Achar, and Dr. Satyanarayana Achar. Passionate in manuscriptology, he has collected and edited more than 10 unpublished manuscripts belonging to the Dvaita tradition and published them from many research institutes and mathas. His edition of Gita Gudartha Chandrika by Sri Vanamali Mishra was selected for Professor Hiriyana Grantha Puraskara as the best edited book by Karnataka Sanskrit University. Dr. Srinidhi is also a member of founding team of Purna Pramati, an interactive an alternative school in the Bangalore that is attempting to integrate in Indic knowledge systems with mainstream learning. He is also serving as an honorary deputy director of Sri Aitreya Sabha Prakashana Pitha of Sri Udupi Sri Bhandarkeri Matha. This is what we know about Dr. Srinidhi. Basically, a medical doctor getting into Tattvada, and he has come here to present this case today from Adhyayas 7-4. Dr. Srinidhi,
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Punagana Nilayam Patim Ramaya Jagataka Dahanam Cha Vasavi Sunum Gurukula Tilakam Cha Purna Bodham Gurumapi Vigurunomi Gitikam Hashyam. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Srimadananda Tirtharyan Gurun Vidya Divakaran Vande Kudrushti Durbodha Vyasa Siddhanta Deepakan Chitraih Padeshcha Kamphirair Vakyair Manair Akhanditaihi Gurubhavam Venjayanti Bhatishri Jayatirthavak Shriman Madhva Mahacharya Padapadmaika Sadmanam Anunam Mahatam Chapi Bhavatat Karunamai. Thank you for that introduction, and I'm happy to be on this panel discussing the Bhagavad Gita in a nutshell over these 2 days. A couple of disclaimers to begin with, or rather not so encouraging notes, given that this is a post-lunch session. I'm not a scholar, I'm a student of the Dvaita school, and I'm not a speaker. So to make this as live and as interesting as possible. I would request your engagement with questions, interjections, objections. Essentially, by making it as interactive as possible, I think we can try to make it live and interesting. The idea for the next couple of hours is to consider the second hexad of the Gita, the Dvitiya Shatka. I understand that the first Shatka was covered by Dr. Achuri Acharya. So as a precursor to that, I'll try to cover a couple of general ideas that are of relevance to understanding the Gita in general and specifically the second Shatka. And then do a broad brush overview of each chapter, that is 7 to 12, with a little bit of a high-level view of what's going on in those chapters. And then we will take a closer look at some of the sections within the Adhyayas, so that we can probably engage a little more on some of the shlokas and a few concepts in those Adhyayas. So that's the overall agenda. In that last section, we will try to see what are the implications a few verses have for our Siddhanta. How Acharya has interpreted seemingly confusing and potentially mistranslatable verses in the right spirit. And in fact, a few that have a really complicated implications, as we see later. So we will spend a little more time on such seemingly confusing verses and try to see how Acharya has resolved. You would have already seen in the morning session, it's very interesting that Srimad Acharya has written actually 2 works on the Gita itself. I mean, it's unusual for a commentator of his stature to write 2 works on the same text, Gita Bhashya and Gita Tatparya, and he does that with the Brahma Sutras also. In fact, there are 4 works on the Brahma Sutra. In a way, this number in itself is talking about the significance that Acharya is attaching to the work that he is commenting upon. So, for example, on the Brahma Sutras, after writing the Sutra Bhashya, he wrote the Anubhashya, the summary text. And then, on request of Sri Trivikrama Pandita to explain his Bhashya, he actually wrote a kind of a tika of his own on the Bhashya called Anuvyakhana. Then, to explain a few specific verses within the Anuvyakhana, he wrote another work called Nyaya Vivarana. So, this unique style of exposing the original from multiple perspectives is an interesting idea that Acharya brought in the commentatorial tradition. And he does a similar thing with the Bhagavad Gita. So he wrote a Bhagavad Gita Bhashya and then a Gita Tatparya. So as the names suggest, the 2 works have a different objective. The Gita Bhashya is primarily talking about kind of a word by word meaning, so to say. That is the intent of a Bhashya. Whereas the Tatparya is trying to look at the overall message that a specific verse or a specific passage or a specific chapter is trying to give. So the Bhashya is looking at verse by verse, word by word kind of a meaning, whereas the Tatparya is looking at the overall message or the Tatparya of that verse. And there are multiple commentaries on Gita Bhashya and Gita Tatparya. The much known, the celebrated tikas by the Tikacharya, the Sri Jayatirtha, are the Prameya Deepika and the Nyaya Deepika. But interestingly, there are a couple of Prachina tikas. Sorry. Oh, sorry. So Acharya started this, the original 2 commentaries on the Gita, And then we have the commentatorial tradition. Do I need to do anything for this? Or? Sure. So we have a couple of Prachina Tikas before that of Sri Jaitirtha. So there are two commentaries on the Gita Bhashya, one by Sri Padmanabha Tirtha and another by Sri Narahari Tirtha. The commentary by Narahari Tirtha is not fully available. It's up till about the half the 8th chapter is what it is currently available. Padmanabha Tirtha's commentary is fully available. And Sri Padmanabha Tirtha has also written another commentary on the Gita Tatparya too. And Sri Jaitirtha has a much more elaborate commentaries. The Prachina Tikas are typically of much shorter length and usually do not go into a lot of details, but have interesting snippets here and there. So it is not that one can replace the other. It's obviously that when we study all of them, we get a complete sense of what is the overall traditional understanding. Then there are other types of commentaries. So one is the Bhashya, the Tatparya, and the commentaries on them, and the Tippanis on the Jaitirtha's Tikas. There we have from Sri Raghavendra Tirtha, from Sri Sumatindra Tirtha, from Raghuttama Tirtha. I mean, there are many Tippanis on the Tikas. And there is another set of commentaries that are the direct commentaries to the Gita, which is the very famous Gita Vivruti of Rayuru, and there is a much older text by Sri Vidyadhiraja Tirtha and Sri Vishveshwara Tirtha. So there are many more that are directly commenting on the Gita, taking from Gita Bhashya and the commentaries thereon. So we will largely be understanding the Gita, obviously, from these sources. So the purpose of this slide was just to show the corpus on the Gita in the Dvaita tradition. I have one point highlighted there in the red, that is in the first verse of the Gita Bhashya, where Acharya says, Devam Narayanam Natva Sarvadosha Vivarjitam Paripurnam Gurumschan Gitartham Vakshami Leshatah. I mean, with basic Sanskrit understanding, some of you may be able to appreciate that this Gitartha can be seen at two different meanings. One is, it can act as a Visheshana for Narayana. So, Devam Narayanam Natva. Who is Narayana? He is the Gitartha. And the second is Gitartham Vakshyam. So, I'm going to tell you the Gitartha. What is that Gitartha? Gitartha is Narayana himself. So, this Gitartha actually refers to, and this is an interesting interpretation that Sri Narahari Tirtha actually provides in the first verse of the Gita Bhashya Tika. He says, Devo Vidyotanadhyaha, and that's how the verse starts. And Sarva Samarthya Purnaha, Sriman Narayanastam Shruti Nuti Paramam Krishna Geetam Namami. So he uses the phrase Krishna Geetam as an adjective to Narayana. That is, Narayana is an object who has been described by Krishna. So what is the object of Gita? When one way is to say that, okay, Arjuna was in a confusion and therefore had to, the problem had to be resolved. And that is obviously one message. But more central message of the whole Gita is to understand about the Lord himself. So therefore, Gitartha is the Bhagavan. And when Acharya says Gitartham Vakshyami, he is also intending Gitartham Narayanam Natva Gitartham Vakshyami. So I am bowing down to Narayana, who himself is the actual Gitartha. And I'm also explaining the meaning of the Gita. Why this becomes important is for the purpose of our, the second Shatka. Because the second Shatka is primarily about the Paramatman himself. So Gitartha, as I was discussing in the previous slide, Gitartha as Narayana himself is quite literally the central message. I mean, this is the central Shatka. We have the Prathama Shatka and the Tritiya Shatka between the two, and here is the Dvitiya Shatka, which is the central part of the Gita, and arguably that is the central message of the Gita too. And that central message is the supremacy of the Lord. And that Vishnu Sarvottamatva is a common theme that recurrently comes in these 6 chapters. So in that sense, when we say Gitartha, it is also the artha of all the 18 chapters, and more specifically in this Dvitiya Shatka, the supremacy of the Lord is the central idea. And this is in line with the core idea that Acharya has described as the overall message of the Bhagavad Gita. And this is from the Gita Tatparya, the first sentence there, that Swavihita Vrittya Bhaktya Bhagavadaradhanameva Paramo Dharmaha Tad Viruddhaha Sarvopya Dharmaha Bhagavadadhinatvat Sarvasya Iti Bodhayati Bhagavan Narayana. What is it that Krishna is telling in as the main message of the Gita is you have to follow Paramadharma. And what is that Paramadharma? To do your duty, your prescribed duty. And by Svavihita Vritti in the context of Bhagavad Gita, it refers to the Varnashrama Dharma. So whatever Arjuna is expected to do as a Kshatriya, as a Grihastha, if he does that, that becomes the Svavihita Vritti. And that is and it has to be performed with devotion towards Lord and seen as an activity of worshipping him. When these three come together, that is Svavihita Vritti, Bhakti and Bhagavad Aradhana, these three form what is called Paramadharma in the Gita context. Why is that the Paramadharma? And that is what we are going to discuss in the second Shatka. Because everything is under the control of Paramatma, and therefore whatever you do, if you have this understanding that you are doing this as the Aradhana of the Lord, then it becomes Paramadharma. And this whole section is trying to establish how the Vishnu Sarvottamatva is to be understood. Can I make it full screen? I think that's better.
Minimize the previous screen.
Okay. Sure. Then one more point to understand before we enter the Shatka specifically, this idea of dividing the Bhagavad Gita into 3 Shatkas is what Acharya gave, and this is the first line from the Gita Bhashya 7th chapter, where Acharya says, Sadhanam pradhanyena uttam atitair adhyayaihi uttaraistu shadbhihi Bhagavan mahatmyam pradhanyena aha. So we have discussed the sadhana as how to achieve our goal in the previous 6 chapters. And in the next 6 chapters, we are going to discuss about the Bhagavan Mahatmya. And that's the declaration that Acharya gives at the beginning of the 7th chapter. Therefore, he is making this rather interesting classification, which is probably not conceived of earlier, as to you can think of these 18 chapters into the 3 Shatkas. The first 6, in fact, in the first 6, the actual classification or a hint to that comes in the 2nd chapter. You would have probably seen this in the morning, where in the 39th verse of the 2nd chapter, Krishna says, okay, I have talked to you about the Nityatva of the Jiva and Nityatva of the Paramatma, and the the requirement for you to stick to your Swadharma. And now I'm going to discuss in detail about the yoga, or the way in which you need to conduct yourself during this war. So that is the yoga. So Krishna declares this in the 39th verse of the 2nd chapter, saying, okay, I've discussed Sankhya till now. I will now be discussing yoga. And that yoga discussion ends at the end of 6th chapter. So from the middle of the 2nd chapter till the end of the 6th chapter is what Krishna himself has declared as yoga. Then the first verse of the 7th chapter is where Krishna now goes on to argue that that's the first verse there, where he is saying, I will now talk to you about how this yoga can lead to jnana. And that jnana is what I'm going to talk to you about. So in the first 6 chapters, it is about the process or the methodology to obtain jnana. And in the next 6 chapters, it is about what is that you will finally understand. So I'm going to teach you knowledge, quote unquote, actually means that I'm going to teach you about the object of which you will get the knowledge of. So I'll now talk to you about the Bhagavan himself, who is the goal of the yoga that I described in the previous 6 chapters. So the first 6 chapters are about the instruments of obtaining knowledge. And the next 6 chapters are about what that knowledge is. So, yeah, please.
When he's saying, I mean, I always got this conflict whenever I read it. When he says Bhagavan himself,
Yeah.
he's talking about Bhagavan. Is he somewhere is he reconsidering that I'm that person?
Of course. Yeah. So in fact, that is one of the main takeaways as we see in the Vibhuti Yoga and the Vishwarupa Adhyaya, 10th and 11th chapters. That is correct. So he is trying to reinforce that he and the Mula Rupa are not different.
Because many other scholars, in other
True.
So the him, the different Paramatma and Krishna.
Correct.
Has, so when you another cover that, maybe you want to
Sure.
express upon that.
Sure.
This question my daughter always asks me. Is Krishna bragging about himself?
So there are 2 ways to look at it. Let's say he is. What's the problem? Generally, when we say bragging is a problem, it is usually when we are talking about the qualities that we really don't have, but are just for the sake of showcasing it, trying to exaggerate things. So if it is in fact true, then there is no problem in actually saying what it is. And the second, Arjuna is actually asking to know the real truth. And there is no way to escape than saying that he is the God. So from both senses, one, for a true seeker, he has to reveal what he is. And second, when he is so, there is no problem in saying what he is. So that I think.
If we can,
Yeah, of course. I mean, that will probably make it more,
the second half is generally.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah. So if there are any questions.
I used to answer that question. I used to tell her that, unless Krishna reveals himself, there is no way of you knowing it.
True. Which is what Krishna is going to say in the Vishwarupa Adhyaya also, that unless he gives that Divya Chakshus and Anugraha, there is
He
no.
is not bragging by sense, because it is what it is. It is the reality of it. He is what it is. He is just telling, I am supreme, because he is supreme.
Correct.
That's what you also
Correct.
Like, he's not bragging. It's just that he's just telling you what the reality is. Because unless he says the reality,
Nobody else.
there is nowhere, even for example, even for Acharyas, there is no way Acharya will know it unless Krishna reveals himself.
True.
Through Vedas or whatever communication.
So the first link between the first Shatka and the second Shatka is that the first Shatka is the sadhana, second Shatka is the sadhya. So the goal that we want to learn. The other way to look at the two is there is some kind of a mutual dependence. In the way, you would have seen in the morning session that Krishna talks of the idea of nivritta dharma or nishkama karma. And this nivritta dharma essentially refers to the idea of someone engaging in their own swadharma with 2 aspects. One, nishkama, and with the correct knowledge of why and what is he doing. So nishkamam jnanapurvam tu nivrittam iti chochyate. That's the quote that Acharya gives from Manusmriti. So if you have to engage in nivritta dharma, you should be knowing as to what's your goal and the significance and the supremacy of the Paramatma. So only when you know what we are talking in the second 6 chapters, can you actually follow what was described in the first 6 chapters. And it is also true that only by following what is told in the first 6 chapters, you can actually know what is described in the second 6 chapters. So it can sometimes be seen as a kind of a chicken and egg, but the issue is, and it is well known, the Bhagavata takes this problem and it is, Acharya also gives a nuanced understanding to this problem, saying it is not true that karma, bhakti and jnana can be, seen as completely 3 different things in silos. You can get jnana with the kind of sadhana that you do, and that will incrementally improve your jnana, and therefore the kind of karma that you do will also gradually increase or improve. So with this kind of a mutual dependency and mutual kind of a complementary role that jnana and karma are playing, this sadhya and sadhana is also, depending on at what stage we are, they mutually help each other. So sadhya and sadhana, in a way, it's a theoretical abstraction to say that, okay, these are the sadhanas and these are the sadhyas. But in practice, all of these have to obviously come together. So there is a mutual dependence between the first six chapters and the next 6 chapters. And the third way to look at the relationship between the first 6 chapters and the second 6 chapters is what Krishna has described in the early parts of the second chapter. So where he talks about the nityatva of the jiva, there are multiple strands to that discussion. One is to say that, okay, I am bimba and the jivas are pratibimbas, and therefore, in fact, the nityatva of jiva is because of the nityatva of the bimba. And I mean, just if the bimba is nitya, it doesn't necessarily follow that the pratibimba should also be nitya. But one of the requirements for pratibimba to be nitya is bimba nityatva. So therefore, understanding bimba is a requirement to understand pratibimba nityatva in much more detail. Similarly, Krishna has also spoken of the puja pujaka bhava in the first few verses of the second chapter itself. That's how Acharya interprets in Gita Tatparya, not so in Gita Bhashya. But in Gita Tatparya, he says, even though Krishna is saying that I am nitya and you are nitya, everyone is nitya, but there is a distinction between the nityatva of the Lord and nityatva of the jiva, because jivas don't have their bodies nitya, whereas Bhagavan has even the deha nityatva and he has swatantriya. So there is a much deeper meaning to the nityatva of Paramatma compared to nityatva of jiva. And because of that, the implication is that, okay, there is this swatantriya aswatantriya distinction, even though both are nitya, one is swatantra and the other is aswatantra, and as a follow-up to that, one becomes puja, one who has to be worshipped, and the other becomes worshipper. So Arjuna's overall activity that gets prescribed later, because I mean, if it is just about nityatva, then there is no reason for Arjuna to follow what Krishna is saying. I mean, it may just solve his problem of, okay, somebody is going to die. I mean, he may say, okay, nobody is going to die, but why should I actually follow what you are saying? Because of the distinction between the nityatvas also. So there is swatantriya, aswatantriya, there is puja, pujakatva, and Krishna also says, avyaktoyam achintyoyam avikaryoyam uchyate, tasmadenam viditvaivam nanushochitum arhasi. So if you know about me in this way, you won't feel sad about it. What does that mean? I mean, so because I am the Sarva Purusharthada, I am the person who will take care of you. So if you understand about me, all of your problems will be resolved by that understanding. So that puja pujakatva, raksha rakshakatva, bimba pratibimba, so all of these relationships that have been explained or alluded to in a sense in the second chapter become more clear when we understand the real glory of the Paramatman, because he is the puja, he is the raksha, he is the bimba, and he is the swatantra. So in that way, this is another relationship between the second chapter and the sixth chapter and the next 6 chapters.
It's okay to have mutual dependency, but it is not okay to have mutual reliance.
True. Correct.
So in this case,
It's not even, well, that's what, I mean, technically in the Shastras, we call it Anyonyashraya. So Anyonyashraya is surely a fallacy. But here, because what we are talking about as one is dependent on the other are actually 2 different things in a sense. So for example, if I say studying is a requirement to pass an exam, and passing the exam is a requirement to study, I can make that statement completely logical, in the sense studying in second standard is a requirement to pass second standard exam, and passing in second standard is a requirement to study third standard subjects, and studying them is a requirement to study that exam, and passing that is a requirement to study the next one. So there is actually, I mean, if we just club all of these as exams and all of these as studies, I'm just abstracting it and saying, okay, studies are dependent on exams are dependent on studies, but that's not really the case, because the study and the exam that we are talking about in each successive statements are actually different ones. So there is in fact no mutual reliance in that sense, because this study and this exam are different. So so there is an incremental growth. So the karma that we talked about in the first step is different from the improvised karma that is happening because of an additional jnana. So this is a kind of, so I mean, this mutual dependence is only when we are generalizing it and talking in abstract, but in reality there is no mutual dependence. Sure. So with that, just a quick view on what. Yes. Sure.
The karma which takes you to the next stage of jnana.
Yeah.
May not be the same karma what you do after that.
Of course, correct. So I mean, I was trying to say that there is an incremental improvement in this relationship. So therefore, jnana leading to karma and karma leading to jnana is not an anyonyashraya, because we are talking about two different objects. One leading to two and two leading to, there are separate states. Yeah.
You achieve one, then you perform 10 plus 1, 11 karma.
Correct.
And then you go 10, 11 plus 5.
Or you perform the same karma with a better.
At a better quality. Correct.
Better quality.
Yeah. Okay, so with that understanding of the relationship between the first Shatka and the second Shatka, this is just a quick view on how these 6 chapters are distributed and what is it that they have. So these are the popularly used names. There are 2 opinions on the names of the chapters, that these are not traditional in a sense. You don't necessarily get to see these names at the end of the colophon of each chapter in earlier manuscripts. So it is just that, okay, iti Srimad Bhagavad Gitayam Ashtamodhyayah. But many of them do refer to this longish colophon that we are familiar with, iti Bhagavad Gita, so Upanishatsu, ityadi, and so yoga, referring to so and so. It's not. Acharya himself refers to the Vishwarupa Adhyaya by name Vishwarupa Adhyaya. So it's difficult to make a conclusive statement that these are completely modern names. But whether all of these are accurate enough is debatable. Accurate enough in the sense they are just indicative of what we may expect in that chapter. Representative of what you may. Some subject matter, because there is actually a little more than what those words say, which we will see later. Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
These headings are not there in the original.
Some of the, well, I mean, there is nothing called original in that sense now, because even the oldest manuscripts that we can trace are around 700, 800-year-old maximum. So usually, I mean, in the tradition, it is a kind of copy of a copy and a copy. So, and if someone adds a couple of words here and there, it's very difficult to know. In fact, that's the significance of Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, for example, is primarily for that purpose. There have been multiple interpolations and contaminations here and there. But this is standard usage, and to my knowledge, there is nothing problematic in these names.
Nothing to worry about glorifying or not glorifying.
Yeah,
Names.
correct.
There is one problem which still I am not able to crack my head about.
Yeah.
Arjuna Vishada Yoga, chapter 1.
Yeah.
How can Vishada be yoga?
No, I think, this yoga is a term used here as a kind of a delimiter. So for in the Bhagavad Gita, what is the content? It is about Arjuna Vishada. Because the whole thing is the Yoga Shastra, there are different names given with the suffix yoga. Just like Parva, Kanda, Adhyaya, Sarga, Sara, Patala, there were many other names that people use. So yoga is a suffix as a delimiter, is my understanding. But a couple of points to note here. One is, in the 7th and the 9th chapter, there is no question by Arjuna. So all of it is Krishna's Upadesha. And the 8th chapter, there are, first 2 verses are Arjuna's questions, and everything that follows is Krishna's Upadesha. And then Sanjaya enters in the 11th chapter. In fact, this is the only chapter in the middle, except his role in the first 2 chapters and in the 18th chapter, which is obvious. As a narrator, he had to tie these things together, conclude. And therefore, you get Sanjaya's role in the 18th chapter and in the first and second chapter. But this is the only other chapter in which Sanjaya has a role. And we can obviously understand why that is the case. Krishna is revealing his Vishwarupa, and you need a narrator to explain what's happening. So Sanjaya is performing that role. So overall, but there are the Vishwarupa Yoga is the 3rd largest in the sense. So the 18th chapter is the largest chapter, 78 shlokas. The 2nd chapter is 2nd largest, that's 72. Then Vishwarupa Adhyaya is the 3rd largest in the whole Gita. So this gives us this is just for a quick view of how the distribution is. And 209 total number of verses, but it may sound as a little less than the first one, which is about 280, if I'm not wrong, the first 6 chapters. But there we have a lot in the first Adhyaya, which is not necessarily the Gita content per se. So in terms of content and Krishna's actual Upadesha, this forms the crux of Gita in a sense. So what exactly lies in these 6 chapters? There are multiple approaches one can take to understand what's inside. One easy way, and probably the most authentic way, is to look at Tatparya Nirnaya, because Acharya has given a quick summary in 15 verses of the whole of Bhagavad Gita in Tatparya Nirnaya at the beginning of Bhishma Parva. Then there are other works like Gita Sarodhara is a work by Sri Adavi Vishnu Tirtharu. And then Gita Sara is a Kannada work by Vyasarajuru, is quite popular. I have a couple of slides later as an extract from them. Then there is Gitartha Vaibhava, which is about the Gita Mahatmya that is present in the Padma Purana. So Sri Satyasanta Tirtha has composed a summary of the Padma Purana Gata Gita Mahatmya in, I think, about 20 verses. So those talk about there is a story attached to each Adhyaya Patha, that somebody had a curse to be in a Brahma Rakshasa Yoni, and he got released from that, and that curse was because of the Parayana of a specific Adhyaya, somebody got the fruit of it, etc. So those are in the Gitartha Vaibhava. And one other way to look at the big picture is to look at the first sentence of Gita Bhashya and Gita Tatparya, each Adhyaya, because Acharya actually tells what is it that is coming in this chapter, which is a little more than the chapter name. And that is much more clearer in terms of what exactly we have to expect in this Adhyaya. And the reason why that becomes important is when we make this classification into Adhyayas, there has to be something that binds these things into one. One is, we know that, the whole 6 Shatka is primarily talking about the Mahatmya of Paramatma. Therefore, this is a group. Within that group, why should there be 6 sub-chapters or 6 chapters? Because there is one binding theme within that chapter. And what is that theme is what Acharya introduces at the beginning of each chapter in Gita Bhashya and Gita Tatparya. We will come to that later. And another way to look at it is by just looking at some verses that actually indicate what do I say next. So Krishna will say, I am now going to give you the Upadesha of Jnana. I will now tell you about Vijnana. So these are kind of headers in the middle of the flow. So they also talk about the content that is going to come next. True. In fact, so for example, Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam, Pavitramidam Uttamam is at the beginning of the 9th chapter. This is what I'm going to tell you. So therefore, Raja Vidya, Raja Guhya Yoga. And sometimes, Jnanam Teham Savijnanam Idam Vakshyami. So I will tell you about Jnana and Vijnana. So then it became Jnana Vijnana Yoga. It's the 7th chapter. So largely true. So this is what I was referring to as the summary from the Tatparya Nirnaya. So Acharya in the 25th chapter, so there are 5 verses before this, which are talking primarily about the Jiva Nityatva. So which I mapped to the first Shatka. Then post the, so there are 3 more verses in the next slide, but after that, there are a couple of more verses which talk about Purushottama Yoga and the conclusion. So that is referring to the 3rd Shatka. Whereas the 2nd Shatka, interestingly, a lot of information or most of the content of this 15 verses that Acharya has is actually about the 2nd Shatka, because that is talking about the Sarvottamatva of Bhagavan. So I'll just actually go through this so that we will get a summary view of what is there in the 2nd Shatka. Srishtisthityappyajnana bandhamoksha pravrittayah prakasha niyamau chaiva brahmeshadiksharassya cha akshara prakrite santaha matta eva nachanyataha. So janmadhyashta kartritva for all of the entities, living and non-living, including to Lakshmi Devi, is because of me. So that establishes the supremacy of Bhagavan. So whoever is actually in control of the birth and death of someone else, obviously has to be superior to the people who is under control. And therefore, name kutaschit sargadhyaha, but there is no one controlling me who can do this for me, because and therefore I am Swatantra and I am Gunapurna. And because I am Swatantra and Gunapurna, no one actually can control me. Ata samadhika bhavat sarvam madvashamevahi. So there is no equal or the superior, and everything is under my control. And by knowing this and the dependency of the jivas, thirdly, jiva aswatantriya nivrittaucha. The jivas are incapable to come out of their dependency also. So someone may be dependent at some point in time, but if they become independent later, you can't claim that I am their controller forever. So, but they don't have the ability to come out of the dependency either. So therefore, you just follow what I am instructing you. So that is one chunk of the information. Then, if you do that, yetu sarvani karmani mai sanyasya matparaha ananyena iva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate. This is in fact directly taken from the Gita. So the 2 verses there, Acharya has directly used from the Gita. So if someone actually does this sarva karma samarpana and upasana, tesham aham samudharta bhavami. So I will be I will protect them, I will liberate them, and I will give them the moksha. Maya tatamidam sarvam jagad avyakta murtina. I am pervasive. I am vyapta in all of the existing world. Matsthani sarva bhutani. All of the objects or entities are in me, but I am in none of them. Though he is actually physically maybe present in all of them, but when he says everything is in me, but I am in none of them, it is in the sense of dependence. I'm not dependent on any of these, but all of these are dependent on me. And therefore, though the common understanding is the Lord is present in every being, and every being is also present in the Lord, but he's saying in terms of dependencies, I'm not present in any of them. And my deha is supurna satsarva guna dehoham sarvada prabhu asprishta akhila doshaika nitya sattanu ravyaya. So we get the overall sense. So after saying this, Arjuna is convinced of what Krishna is saying, but he wants an additional kind of triangulation. Ityukto vasavik praha vyaptam te darshayeshame. So I'm convinced of what you are saying, but I want to see with my eyes to confirm, not in the sense of having a doubt and therefore I want to confirm, but I'm already convinced of what is being said, but I want to add on to that. I want an additional proof so that my conviction improves. So, and that is when Krishna shows the Vishwarupa. So this is how Acharya has summarized what's going on in these 6 chapters. What is important to know here is what Krishna showed is the Deshatah Kalataschaiva Purnam Sarva Gunais Sada Darshayamasa Bhagavan Yavati Arjuna Yogyata. So Arjuna saw Krishna in a form that is present in space infinitely and in time infinitely, and with the gunas that Arjuna can see, because the infinite gunas cannot be seen by everyone, in fact, no one, but based on their own abilities, to their ability, whatever they can see. This kalataha vyapti is something to understand. We will touch on this again when we discuss Vishwarupa Adhyaya, because what does that mean? I mean, we can understand about ourselves as being present from minus infinity to plus infinity. But what is it to understand the kala nityatva of the person in front of you, or the desha nityatva of the person in front of you? It is about the role that Paramatma is playing in all times and in all spaces. Therefore, actually Krishna says, Arjuna says, I'm seeing Dhartarashtra's entering your wide open mouth, which is not what has happened, but because they are just about to die, Arjuna is actually seeing things that are imminent in their occurrence. So that is the kind of one way to understand Kala Nityatva, Kalataha Nityatva of Bhagavan. Correct. But no, I mean, in the sense, I would say it is a kind of a, sorry if that is not a accurate modern translation, but it's a kind of a four-dimensional view. So he's looking at all 3D understanding along with time components. So he is also seeing what can happen, what has happened, what is happening, and what is expected to happen. So that kind of kalataha vyapti is also being seen.
Kala by itself is Nitya.
True. That is in the sense of the components being anitya and the cycle being nitya. But here we are talking about kalataha nityatva refers to permanence. So if an object is permanent, we say that it is kalataha nitya. And if an object is present everywhere, we say that it is deshataha nitya. So Bhagavan is both deshataha nitya, kalataha nitya, and also gunataha vyapta. So even deshataha kalataha nityatva is present with Lakshmi Devi also. So correct. Okay. This is just for those who may be interested. Given that this was meant to be an English workshop, I did include for those most of who will obviously understand. So this is the Gita Sara from Vyasarajara Kelaya Yanamato Parthane Gita Darthava. That's how it starts. And there are 9 verses or 9 padyas. So this is referring to the second 6 chapters in a sense. So, Nane Uttama Manasu Ennalli Mado, Jnana Vijnana Peluve. Jnana Vijnana Peluve is how the 7th chapter begins. Nanu Koduvenu Phalava Manasu Bandante. Manasu Bandante is a colloquial used to say that I'm independent. It doesn't mean that I will do whatever I would like to do, but it means that nobody else can actually control. And then the second one is talking about the 8th chapter, which we will come to. That is about the Antyakala Smarana and what needs to be done, and therefore what is the result that we get. Then they go to talk about the Vibhuti Rupa. And in the Vibhuti Rupa, a few examples Sri Rasatirtha has extracted. Akshara Dolage Akaranu, Pakshigalalli Nanu Garudanu. And then there is a generalized statement, Sakala Jatigalalli Shreshtatanadalli Yenna Rupa Tidiyali. So wherever you see some kind of a greatness in any object, it is due to my Vibhuti Rupa. And that's how Krishna ends the 10th chapter. And then in the 11th chapter, Toriso Krishna Ninga Rupa, Arjuna Nodo Rupa. And that's interesting. So he's saying not the one that is, the real Vishwarupa, which probably those who are above him can see, but that which I can see. Yavati Arjuna Yogyata is what Acharya had said. So Arjuna Nodo Rupa, and he saw everything in that. So that's the overall summary. This is the other summary that I was talking about from Gita Bhashya and Gita Tatparya. The first line is from Gita Bhashya and the second line is from Gita Tatparya. So the 7th chapter beginning, Acharya says, Uttaraistu Shadbhihi Bhagavan Mahatmyam. In the next 6 chapters, it's about the Bhagavan Mahatmya. And he says the same in Gita Tatparya also. Bhagavan Mahima Visheshataha. Visheshataha is an important term because you may also see something related to yoga, not necessarily about Bhagavan Mahima. So there is, as we saw in the beginning, the Prathama Shatka was about yoga, whereas Dvitiya Shatka is about Bhagavan. There is some element about Paramatma in the first Shatka also, and there is some element about yoga in the second Shatka also. So this Visheshata is talking about, okay, what is the dominant theme, the most common, or what is that is largely talked about. Then in the 8th chapter is Maranakala Kartavyatwadi, the Kartavya Gatyad, Maranakala Kartavya and the Gati. That is about the Brahmayana. So what are the path, what is the path through which moksha can be achieved, attained, etc. Ukta Vyakhyana Purvakam Brahma Praptihi. And this is what I was talking about when we had that table. Ukta Vyakhyana Purvakam is because at the end of the 7th chapter, and this is how most of our traditional texts are actually organized. So if you look at, say, some of the Bhagavata chapters, there are 1 or 2 teasers at the end of a chapter, which inspires the audience to ask some questions. And that's how Parikshita asks another question, saying, okay, you mentioned something, can you please elaborate a little more on that? And that's how the next chapter usually begins. So here also, at the end of the 7th chapter, Krishna ends with a little bit of a cryptic and a teaser kind of an ending, where with this understanding you can have you will get to know Adhibhuta, Adhyatma and Brahma, something like that. And then Arjuna is obviously tempted to answer, okay, can you please let me know what is that Brahma, Adhyatma, Adhibhuta, and so that's what Acharya is saying, Ukta Vyakhyana Purvakam. So whatever has been told in the 7th chapter, there is some explanation required, and that's what 8th chapter is doing, and about the Brahma Prapti. And Brahma Prapti, Sri Jayatirtha explains, there was a footnote which I'm unable to see here. Okay, that's anyway. So that's about the Maranakala Kartavya. So it's, in a sense, it's about a methodology of how to die. I mean, what is it that you need? So what's the process and what's the right way? I remember one of the orators sometime telling there are books called Badukalu Kaliri. But what we probably need is a book on Sayalu Kaliri, because the preparation is more towards how to die and not. I mean, your living is also about. It's like studying for an exam. So though that is a one-time activity, your preparation is for to be prepared for that. So, and that is what Krishna describes in the 8th chapter. And then the 9th one is actually a continuation from 7. So 8 was as a kind of a detour to explain some of the questions that are coming at the end of 7. So then you get into the 9th chapter. 10th chapter is about the Vibhutis. 11th is for Dhyana, because the Dhyana has already been described in 6th chapter. But what is it that what is that object on which you need to meditate? That hasn't been described. So Vishwarupa, when he actually sees visually, it becomes easier to meditate upon. And then the 12th chapter, so I think this is where that a little bit of a misleading interpretation is possible because of the name of the chapter. It is known as Bhakti Yoga. But one of the main contents in the 12th chapter is to understand whose upasana is better. Is it Lakshmi Upasana and Bhagavad Upasana? Avyakta Upasana versus Vishnu Upasana. Both are valid, but one is a simpler form and is easy to do, and is can get the goals and the results in a quicker interval. That is Vishnu Upasana, whereas Lakshmi Upasana is much more complicated, and that's what Krishna is going to talk in the 12th chapter. And there is also a description about the importance of bhakti and what are the characteristics of a bhakta, etc. Okay, so here, so if there are any questions till now, yeah.
There, he expects it
for more better clarity.
Right.
So, according to our Siddhanta, whatever the meaning that the sentences give, the same is with the Pratyaksha Pramana as so Atma and Pratyaksha are equally
Valid. Yeah.
but here it seems contradictory.
Okay. So the pramanya being equal is not the same as they are being qualitatively same. Let me explain what I mean. So pramanya is a binary function. Something can be pramana or apramana. It cannot be both pramana and apramana, or so it is just, it can take either of the two values. So it's either pramana or apramana. Whereas within the pramanas, you can have a hierarchy of pramanas that is not contradicting its first value, that it is well within the category of pramana only. But within pramana, some of them can be higher pramanas and some can be lower in the sense of, I think, even in Pramana Paddhati, you get this where spashtatve bheda. So Bhagavan also knows the whole world. Lakshmi Devi also knows the whole world. Is there any difference in the way they perceive things? The difference is not an objective difference. I mean, if there was an objective difference, then it wouldn't become pramana. They have to actually perceive whatever exists as it is. Only then it is yathartha. So both Lakshmi Devi and Parabrahma are perceiving the objects as they are. However, there is a difference in the quality of that perception. And that is what's called the spashtatve bheda. And there, Sri Jaitirtha explains that this spashtata bheda is like the paroksha aparoksha bheda. So even in pratyaksha and agama, there is a difference in terms of that clarity. So when you have, I mean, you haven't seen a place and somebody explains to you with all nitty-gritty details as to how it is in a three-dimensional understanding, but you haven't seen it. And once you see that, you now say, okay, now I understand it better. There is no objective change in what you may have already seen and what you may have already visualized by hearing somebody else saying and now seeing. However, there is a qualitative difference between understanding something just by hearing words and understanding something by actually seeing. So that difference here also exists. So though there is no difference in terms of the pramanya per se, there is a difference in terms of the quality of that pramana. I mean, these are not upajivya upajivaka in a sense. These are two completely different. Yeah.
Only the perspective, the jnana that Arjuna got is difference. But if Brahma or somebody has seen that, they have seen it in their own time.
Correct.
But whatever Vishnurupa that has happened,
yeah,
that is the same Vishnurupa.
True. In fact, Acharya gives that.
Sanjay also.
Yeah. Sanjaya also. True. But your other question is actually interesting. So is there a difference between the pramanya of what you have seen, what you have heard and what you are seeing? If there is, does it mean that the first one was apramana or less pramana, whatever? So my understanding is there is no, so when you are trying to look at the value of pramanya, it's a binary thing. It is pramana or apramana. So both are pramana. However, in the quality of or the depth of that pramana, there is a spashtata bheda. So what you have heard and what you see, there is an increased conviction or depth of understanding in terms of, it's like a prakasha krita bheda. So if you're seeing some object in a low dim light and then you have a better light, you probably have the same knowledge about the object, but there is more clarity. So that is exactly. Yeah. So, but his question was 1,000. So is one picture more than 1,000? So I think yes, in that sense. Yeah. So yeah, so any other questions?
Is it necessary that we have to see the links between the two chapters?
I think so,
Because we
because
have already named individual chapters.
Yeah.
And we have said the content is here, this one.
Yeah.
And why do we need to go back to that and link it and every?
yeah, and so I mean, otherwise these become kind of completely independent modules. And then how do we get the oneness in a text? Why? So if we want to call one text as one, there has to be one central message. So if there has to be one central message, there has to be a link between every component of that.
Sometimes, you know,
Right. Hmm.
All these are
Correct, correct. I mean, that's all I was trying to get at.
but linking each one.
Yeah.
Each.
Not necessarily. I mean, we don't need to talk of each chapter and link it back to the first yoga or the first 6 chapters. But I was trying to do that between the whole chunk of 6 chapters and this chunk of 6 chapters, because there is a direct relationship which Acharya himself has said. So, Purva sadhana muktam atitair adhyayaihi Bhagavan mahatmyamaha uttarair adhyayaihi. So there is a direct relationship between these two. Okay. Okay, so with that, in the next 10 to 15 minutes, we will go through what each chapter has to say, and then we will look at a few verses. So the first 3 shlokas in the 7th chapter, is there any pattern to the timing in terms of we are breaking for 5-10 minutes in the middle or something like that?
No, it's not. It is continuous. It's better because there is no need to break because we are already interacting.
Yeah.
There is no time for question and answer.
Okay.
End of the
Okay. Okay.
You can continue.
Okay. No, I mean, if anyone is exhausted and wants to take a 5-minute mental break,
Too much
I'm-
to absorb in let's see.
Maybe, yeah, I mean, we can go through this in 10-15 minutes, and then we can take a 5-10 minute break if need be, and then we can come back. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So Krishna starts off by linking the 2-6 chapters by saying, okay, I have talked till now about the tool, and now I'm talking about the goal. So that's the jnana. The word that Krishna uses are important. So he says, I'm going to talk to you about jnana and vijnana. And this vijnana is obviously not science. So vijnana is vishesha jnana. And Acharya gives many more interpretations. He says it's vishesha jnana and vivichya jnana. Vivichya jnana is to understand things in more discrete or understanding them in more detail by separating the things and not in a generalized sense. And what is that generalization or separation? It is about Vishnu Sarvottamatva, obviously. But what Acharya says and what Krishna actually talks when he talks about Vijnana is that, okay, one way to know about my supremacy is to say that I am the supreme most of everything that's there. This word everything is a little too generic to understand what you actually mean. So Krishna goes into the details and saying, okay, I am the controller of taste in water. I am the smell in Prithvi. So he goes into the details of each object and say that it is not just enough to say I am the controller of everything, because there is a possible misunderstanding with the comparison to the Laukika examples. For example, we can say that this whole country is under someone. Let's say there is a president or a prime minister, so that they control everything. But are they actually controlling every nitty-gritty, minute things that we are doing? Not. So it may be on paper a legally valid statement, but that's not what they are doing. Even physical. But when you go into the more minor micro details of the properties of an object, who is controlling that, etc., surely in the external world, we don't see an example of that sort. So Krishna is trying to clarify that when he talks about Vijnana. So he's saying Jnana is to understand that I am Sarvottama, whereas Vijnana is to go into the details of each object and understand my role in each of them. And he lists down them. We will get to those verses. So that's the second big chunk in the 7th chapter. Then the question arises, okay, what is obstructing us from knowing what you are saying? You seem to claim that you are the controller of everything, and you're actually, the person who is doing all of these activities. But I don't seem to know or think like that. And what's the reason? And so Krishna then introduces the idea of Maya. He argues that, well, because of the general understanding that you have about the world, you are trying to superimpose that understanding on me and thinking that I will be able to reveal myself in the same way that material objects are revealed to you otherwise. And that's not how it works. And therefore, that Maya is obstructing you, to you meaning, it's not necessarily Arjuna, the jivas, to understand this Vijnana and Jnana in the kind of details that I'm explaining. So then what is it that we need to do to cross that Maya? So you surrender to me, you do your Swadharma, and those are therefore required to cross Maya. Then there is a question as to, okay, there are many people who already know about this Sarvajnatva, this Sarvottamatva, and that you are the controller of everything. But they don't seem to actually get into the kind of result that you are claiming. None of them have got moksha. So there is a detailed description of what is called Anya Devata Pujana and Bhagavat Pujana. So there are, even when understanding the Sarvottamatva of Paramatma, people actually many a times end up doing Anya Devata Pujana, even though they may finally do a Samarpana to Paramatma, which is insufficient according to Krishna. So Krishna argues, and that is a very interesting, important distinction that Acharya brings in at that point, that there are these two concepts called Traividya and Bhagavata. We will go to that in a little more detail. So Bhagavata Dharma is what Krishna is trying to mention, but Traividya Dharma is insufficient. Traividyas also know Vishnu Sarvottamatva. Traividyas also do Samarpana to Vishnu, but that is insufficient because they don't know this detail. That is, at every point in time, you are not understanding the role played by the Lord. And until you understand that, you're not getting into moksha. So that's the, and then he comes back to say that, therefore, understanding my supremacy is important. And if you get this jnana and ajnana, you will also get to know about Adhyatma, Adhidaiva, Adhibhuta, Brahma, etc. So that's how the 7th chapter ends. And Arjuna starts 8th chapter by asking questions on that follow-up. Okay, explain more about Brahma, Adhyatma, Karma, etc. And Krishna also ends 7th chapter by saying, those who know this also know how to meditate upon me at the time of their death. Prayana kale chamam te vidur yukta chetasaha. That's the last line in the 7th chapter. Therefore, Arjuna's question also includes, elaborate more on what is that Prayana kala smarane, why is it important, etc. So the 8th chapter is therefore a continuation. It's a kind of an addendum to the 7th chapter, as a kind of an elaboration to the last line. So there are specific responses that Krishna gives, and he also tries to explain why is it significant to remember him at the time of death. He gives the argument that whatever is remembered at the time of death is what you get after death. So therefore, it is important to remember me. And what is the process of that? Why is it that somebody needs to remember only him and not someone else? And so that distinction is made. And then there is a description of the path, which I was talking about as the Brahmayana. So Agnir Jyotiraha Shuklaha. So that is when a jiva is actually going to moksha, these are the different lokas that he goes through. And there is a list that Krishna provides there. So then chapter 9 is continuing from the 7th chapter, because 8th chapter was a clarification for the end of 7. So there is a continuation of this jnana and vijnana. Then he talks about his role in Srishti and Pralaya. Then he clarifies that it is not possible that everybody will understand what I'm saying. So there is a very clear distinction of who does this and who doesn't. So two groups exist. So it is, there is a classical objection against Madhva Siddhanta that you classify things as Nitya Naraki and Mukti Yogya, etc. But this is a classification that Krishna himself makes. So it is just a Acharya is saying what is there. And then he continues to explain this distinction between himself and the other devatas, which is also following up from the previous chapter. And then he ends with the importance of bhakti. And there are a few very important verses there that have been significantly misunderstood. So Acharya's clarification there about the women being Papa Yoni, and then someone can be a Durachari, but if you are a Bhakta, then that Duracharatva can be ignored. So there are a few verses that literally mean that. So Acharya clarifies what those are. So that's at the end of 9th chapter. Then the 10th chapter is continuing from Vijnana, but with special reference to the mental faculties. So Buddhi is also because of me. The Devatas are also because of me. So in the earlier sections, it was about the water and the property in water, or the Panchabhutas and the properties in those Panchabhutas are because of me. That's what this discussion was about. But now he goes into the next level of, okay, the mental faculties are also because of me. And then the Devatas, their existence is because of me. And then Arjuna follows that up with a request, okay, can you please elaborate and more and explain all your Vibhuti Rupas? Where do you reside and how are we supposed to worship you, in what forms, where, etc. And then there is a full list of the Vibhuti Rupas. So we have already discussed this, that there is a request to see Vishwarupa as a kind of a reaffirming what he is known. So Krishna agrees and provides Arjuna with the divine vision. Then Sanjaya narrates the kind of Vishwarupa that Krishna is showing, Arjuna's visualization of that Vishwarupa, and Arjuna follows up with a question, okay, can you please, I mean, this is quite terrifying and I'm not able to understand what's going on, so please explain to me what this is. And Krishna clarifies that, well, I am in this form of killing everyone now. Kalosme lokakshaya krit pravrittha, and therefore you are seeing this kind of a not so easy to digest kind of a form. Then Arjuna's fear by understanding and seeing that, he surrenders completely and he confesses, in a sense, for not knowing this earlier and therefore behaving with Krishna as if it's a common friend. Sakheti matva prasabham yaduktam he Krishna he Yadava he Sakheti. So you need to forgive all these ignorances, and then requests him to come back to his normal form, and then ends with an emphasis on bhakti again. And the last section, that's the 12th chapter, is about the upasana. Till now, what's the relationship now suddenly to talk about Lakshmi? So there are two reasons that the commentators have mentioned. One is, even though the Anya Devata Pujana has already been described in the earlier chapters as not useful, the Shrutis and the Shastras in general have talked about the unique qualities of Ramadevi in terms of her ability to give moksha. So she is capable of giving moksha when the right upasana is done. So you may have rejected everybody else, but you can't reject Lakshmi also as saying, yes, no, she can't give moksha, only I can give. So the Shruti is actually saying so. So is it okay to do her upasana? That is one reason for the question. And the second reason for the question is, just in the previous chapter, it was a kind of an emphasis on bhakti till now. Because of bhakti, I'm able to see this rupa. Is this the only way to look at this? Or is there another avyaktopasana marga, which is a kind of yoga marga? That's how Vanamali Mishra interprets this. He's not talking about Lakshmi Devi per se. He says, even to see the Lord, there are two different paths. One is the bhakti marga, that is Shravana, Manana, Dhyana, etc. And the other is more of yoga marga. And that is quite difficult to follow. So the question here is, should I follow what you have told till now, which is more of bhakti marga, or yoga marga is generally understood in some of the other texts? Is that also okay? So Krishna says both are fine. I mean, he doesn't reject one of the two, but he says one is better and simpler, the other is more complicated, but that is not prohibited. Whereas Anya Devata Pujana is prohibited. It won't lead you anywhere. Well, Lakshmi Puja, but even when he says Lakshmi Puja, it is not, obviously with a misunderstanding of Lakshmi as Sarvottama, etc. It is, so the process Acharya explains that you have to have a much stronger, ritualistic discipline and things like that while doing Lakshmi Puja, whereas Bhagavan is more, a little more lenient, accommodative, and therefore, even if there are some mistakes, he doesn't mind, whereas Lakshmi is much more strict, and therefore it's difficult. And second, even after doing that, after getting Lakshmi's aparoksha, she will then guide you to get Bhagavad aparoksha. So which is the next step that you have to do anyway. So therefore, if you invest the same time and energy, you can probably do much better work by following the path that I have explained till now. So it's not a prohibition per se, and Acharya then says, then, okay, what's the point in doing that path? I mean, you could have easily said, okay, there is no point in doing that, don't do that. So, but he says there are a few adhikaris who are meant to do that like that. It is not wrong for them to do that. Because when you have that Vayu Jaya and Indriya Jaya, etc., then if there is some amount of compromise in your Jnana Bhakti also, even then it will still be compensated by that. So here it is a Jnana Bhakti Prachura Marga, whereas that one is Yoga Prachura Marga, Indriya Jaya Prachura Marga. So there is a small accommodation possible so that your gap in a last mile Jnana is provided by Lakshmi. So she fills that gap, and then you get into this path. Correct. Of course. Yeah. I mean, this is also, there is in fact greater emphasis on bhakti also, but here the object is Lakshmi. Here the object is Bhagavan as the Upasya. So they are doing Lakshmi Upasana, is doing Bhagavad Upasana, but Lakshmi Upasana requires much more tighter rules to be followed, and is much longer, and will also lead you back to Bhagavad Upasana anyway later. So that's the overall summary that Krishna provides. But that is as a combination, not as only Lakshmi. Yeah.
There are people who only Lakshmi.
Yeah, so there are many of this Shakti, and Shakti sometimes they consider as Parvati also.
Correct.
But yeah.
So that is not this.
That's not this. So here, I mean, this is completely Vaishnava Marga. So here this is not Lakshmi as the Sarvottama. Lakshmi as obviously next to Bhagavan, but for example, we know Prana Upasana. So we do all kinds of other Upasanas also, not with an intent of them being the Sarvottamas. But what is your main activity of Upasana is towards some person, some object, some entity. And here the Upasana is towards Lakshmi Devi. And that Lakshmi Devi is capable of giving moksha also. And therefore the question as to whom should we do the Upasana. And then he ends by saying, so therefore, follow my marga, my path, it's easier to do. And he gives a few steps of, if you can't do a focused dhyana, at least do some yoga. If you can't do that, practice it. If you can't do that, do some karma. So there is a gradation as to, and you can decide as to where you are, and then gradually move forward.
This is 8 to 12, is it?
Yeah, this is the 8 to 12. Yeah. 8 to 12 verses in chapter 12. Yeah. And then what actually does it entail? What is it that when you mean, okay, I should do Bhagavad Upasana? So what are the components of that? So that's how the 12th chapter ends. So one last slide before we could probably break if need be. So what are the implications of all of these ideas? So one is for Taratamya, because in the 7th chapter, when he says, there is a role for Prakriti, there is a role for me, there is a role for other devatas. So that Taratamya is directly mentioned. Then the importance of Bhakti, the Traividya and the Bhagavata distinction that I was talking about, where even by knowing, even while knowing the importance and the significance, supremacy of the Lord, you are not remembering him all the time and not knowing the details of his control over minute things, then you are called a Trividya. So that is not sufficient to lead you to moksha. So that detailed understanding of the role that Paramatma is playing, so that's another conceptual clarity that is required. And why is he saying all of this? It is because of, so he is not saying that I am the water, I am the rasa in water, I am gandha in prithvi, because there is a object that he consumes also. That is actually nothing but himself. It is called swakhya rasa. So, for example, in the Naivedyas and other places, we talk of that, right? So, in all the objects, there is a core element which is the Paramatma himself. And that rasa is what he is also explaining here. And it is required for our upasana also. And then a little later, let's talk about the idea of Vishesha, which is required while understanding the Vishwarupa. And types of vibhutis. Acharya clarifies that in Gita Tatparya, that it is not just one kind of vibhuti. There are 4 types of vibhutis. That is not obvious in the Gita, but we need Acharya's help to understand that. And there is a connection to the Brahma Sutras, which we'll talk later. Any questions till now? Or
Very interesting, sir. It was really engaging.
okay, so if need be, we can take a 5-minute break. Yeah, sure.
Thanks to explain.
Yeah, sure. So, Okay, so the one way to look at what are some of the important verses is there is this section at the beginning of Gita Tatparya, which in itself a very, very interesting part, which is worth studying for a whole session, where Acharya claims that this is the message of the Gita. So he tries to summarize the whole Gita in this one line. Tatra sakshad indravataram uttamadhikarinam atmanah priyatamam arjunam. So Arjuna is uttamadhikari. He is sakshad indravatara, and he is very dear to himself, that is Krishna. So Arjuna, who is of this nature, to him Krishna is bodhayati Bhagavan Narayana. So to him Narayana is teaching. What is he teaching and why is he teaching? Kshatriyanam visheshatopi paramadharmam Narayanadvit tadanubandhi nigraham bandhu snehat adharmatvena ashankya tato nivritta prayam. So Arjuna is withdrawing himself from an activity that is paramadharma for a Kshatriya. What is that activity? Narayanadvit tadanubandhi nigraha. So you have to keep under check or under control who are the opponents of Paramatma and those who are supporting that party. But bandhu snehat adharmatvena ashankya. So even though that is the dharma, he is thinking of that as adharma and he is therefore withdrawing from that action. So for such an Arjuna, Krishna is teaching this, what Swavihita Vrittya Bhaktya Bhagavadaradhanameva Paramo Dharma. This we saw a little earlier also. So do your Vritti Dharma and your with bhakti towards Lord, and to do this as that itself as Bhagavadaradhana, that activity itself as Aradhana. And if you do that, that is the Paramadharma. And anything that is outside of the scope of this is Adharma. Why? Because everything is under his control. So this last, after claiming this as the main and the core message of the Gita, Acharya gives about 30 to 40 verses from the Gita to justify that this in fact is what is told in the Gita. So this is a claim that Acharya is making at the beginning of Gita Tatparya to say that this is actually the message of the Gita. Why do you say so? Because you see this chapter, this verse, etc. And then what is it that you can derive out of that? It has to finally conclude in this. While doing that, majority of the verses that Acharya has selected are actually from these 6 chapters. So I have made a list or the compilation of those verses here that will give us an indication of what is it that is coming there. So this is at the end of the 11th chapter, and Acharya is using this to establish the points that are mentioned in bold. Vishnu bhaktereva sarva sadhana uttamatvam paroksha aparoksha jnanayoho jnanino api mokshasya tadadhinatvancha. So bhakti, Vishnu bhakti is important for 3 aspects. One for paroksha jnana, aparoksha jnana, and even to get into moksha. And what interesting quote that Acharya provides there is actually coming at the end of 11th chapter. Now we know overall distribution of the chapter, so we should be able to link them to the content. And this is coming at the end of Vishwarupa. At the end of Vishwarupa Adhyaya, Krishna is saying, Naham vedair na tapasa na danena na cha ijjaya shakya evam vidho drashtum drishtavanasi mam yatha. How you have seen me, no one can see by any other tool than bhakti. So you may have studied the Vedas, Naham vedaihi na tapasa, not from tapas, neither from dana nor yajna. None of these, with any of these tools, can I be visible in the way that you have actually seen me. Then what is the alternative, or what is the real path? bhaktya tvananyaya shakyaha aham evam vidho Arjuna. Only with bhakti, that is ananya bhakti, is I visible, will I be visible? Jnatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum, for three things. One is for knowledge, and the other is for darshana, and the third is for pravesha. So those are the three things that Acharya interprets as paroksha jnana, aparoksha jnana, and moksha. So Krishna is saying bhakti is required for jnana, darshana, and pravesha. So how do you differentiate jnana and darshana? So jnana is also knowledge, and darshana is also generally understood as knowledge, and therefore, but darshana is direct perception, and therefore Acharya says it is aparoksha jnana. So jnana refers to paroksha jnana, darshana refers to aparoksha jnana, and it is also relevant to say so because it is coming just at the end of Vishwarupa Darshana. So just after Vishwarupa Darshana, Krishna is saying to know, to see, and to enter, you need bhakti. So therefore, Acharya implies this and takes this as an important reference for a philosophical implication that therefore bhakti is the important sarvasadhana uttama, because none of the others, Veda, Tapas, Dana, Yajna, are capable of doing this. It is only the bhakti that is helping you to get jnana, to get darshana, and to get moksha. Therefore, Vishnu bhaktereva sarvasadhana uttamatvam. Paroksha, aparoksha jnana yu. For paroksha jnana and for aparoksha jnana. And even for the one who has knowledge, moksha se tadadhinatvam. Moksha is also under Paramatman's control. So this is one important verse that Acharya himself quotes.
Not study Veda.
No, obviously that's not the meaning. It's just with that you can't attain. So there is a standard Upanishadic verse, na medhaya, na bahuna shrutena, yame vaisha vrunate tena labhyaha. So you cannot you cannot reach the Lord with pravachana, with vedadhyayana, with dhyana, with anything, but only if he decides to take you, will you be will he become visible for it. So that's basically to say that the bhakti and bhagavat prasada are the most important things. That's not obviously to say that none of the others are required. All of those are required, but they are kind of proximate, more distal and more preliminary things. Whereas even with that, if you don't have bhakti, you will not get. So that's the. Then this is actually the last verse of the 11th chapter. Matkarma kran matparamaha madbhakta sangavarjitaha nirvaira sarva bhuteshu yassamameti pandava. So broad translation would be, you keep doing a work that is related to me. So do Bhagavat Pujadi karma. Mad bhaktaha, while being my bhakta, while being detached from everything else. Mat paramaha, that is to know while knowing my supremacy. Ahameva paramaha iti jnanam yasya, saha mat paramaha. You should be knowing that I am the supreme and keep doing. And sarva bhuteshu nirvairaha, without any partiality or love and hate with anyone. So with those kinds of relationships, you keep doing. Acharya makes an interesting inference from this verse. He says this is an important verse to know because he's saying mad bhaktaha sangavarjitaha mat karma krit. So you should be my bhakta and still keep doing the karma that is prescribed for you. Because this is, as someone was asking earlier, one of the very strong misinterpretations that we see in other bhashyas is that if you go into the bhakti marga, you can leave all your karma. So you're not bound by any ritualistic prescription. So you can be, as long as you are a bhakta and you're not harming anybody, do no harm, but you don't have the ritualistic boundaries. But if that were to be the case, why is Krishna insisting mat karma krit? So you have to be doing my karma while being bhakta. So Acharya says, bhaktasyapi tat karma vikarma tyagascha. So even for a bhakta, he can't claim exemptions by saying I am bhakta and therefore I don't need to be doing any of the karmas. So karma that is prescribed for you is mandatory irrespective of your claimed position as a bhakta. So that is another important verse for the significance or the mandatoriness of the karma. Then there are a few verses that Acharya quotes that justify his earlier claim on the status of Arjuna. So if you remember that slide that I showed earlier, Sakshad Indravataram Uttamadhikarinam Arjunam. So Arjuna is a much high caliber student in a sense. Why is that important? Because some people made this mistake again in other bhashyas that okay, Krishna is telling to Arjuna that you should do your karma. That's not for us. I mean, this is height of arrogance. But anyway, the interpretation that they gave was Arjuna is at a lower level. And therefore, Krishna is teaching, okay, you need to do this. But once you reach our stage, you don't need to be actually engaging in these kinds of activities. You can be kind of, not having necessarily mandated by any of the ritualistic restrictions. So to counter that, Acharya makes this elaborate argument that don't underestimate Arjuna's position. He is the Uttamadhikari. In fact, everybody else that you think can be some other adhikaris are actually quite adhamadhikaris, but it is Arjuna who is the Uttamadhikari. So if Krishna is saying this to Uttamadhikari, how can you claim exemption by saying, this is for a, I mean, it literally is saying that, okay, Arjuna is at a lower caliber, therefore we can do everything. That's not what Krishna is saying. So to make that argument, Acharya uses these 4 verses from 11th, 9th, and again 11th chapters to show that Arjuna is both Uttamadhikari and that he is already an Aparoksha Jnani. So he is one, it is very evident that he is seeing the Vishwarupa and therefore he is an Aparoksha Jnani. And second, Krishna says, Sudurdarshamidam Rupam Drishtavanasi Yanmama Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityam Darshana Kankshinaha. Arjuna, the kind of Rupa that you saw is actually not easily visible even for the Devatas. Deva Apyasya Rupasya Nityam Darshana Kankshinaha. Devas are also eager to see this form every day. But this is a Sudurdarshamidam Rupam. This is not an easily visible form which you have seen. And that is elevating Arjuna's position in hierarchy, saying, okay, he is at a much higher pedestal. There is another verse where he says, Mahatmanastu mam partha daivim prakritim ashritaha bhajanti ananya manasaha jnatva bhutadim avyayam. The people who are in the Daivi Sampath are the ones who worship me with ananya manas. And Arjuna's ability to worship Paramatma in Ananya Manas is well established. And therefore, that is also another verse to establish that Arjuna is Uttamadhikari. Then Arjuna says, Darshaya Atmanam Avyayam. Please reveal yourself to me. And that is an Aparoksha Jnanitva indicator. And Krishna Darshayamasa Parthaya Paramam Rupam Aishwaram. Krishna did show the Paramarupa to Arjuna. And therefore, these are all aspects, verses that show that Arjuna is in fact Uttamadhikari and is Aparoksha Jnani. And then there is a huge list of verses that Acharya gives to establish the ones that are highlighted in bold. Sarvasmad Bhagavato Bhedaha. So one constant thing that is seen across these chapters is the distinction between the Lord and every other object. Then Sarvasya Tadadhinatvam. It is not just distinction, because I mean we also are distinct from each other, but we are not we are not controlling other. So Sarvasya Bhagavadadhinatvam. Then Tasya Ananyadhinatvam, but he is not under anybody's control. Sarvottamatvam, Sarvaguna Purnatvam, Sarvashastranam Tat Paratvam. His Sarvaguna Purnatva, his Sarvottama, and all Shastras are talking about his supremacy only. That is, Acharya says, that is the Mahatatparya of every text. Tatha tadjnanadeva moksha. And similarly, moksha is possible only with his knowledge. So these are the things that we can infer from a lot of verses in these 6 chapters. And Acharya gives a list of those verses. So I'll go through each of them. That will give us the real summary or the core of these 6. So this is at the beginning of the 7th chapter. Jnanam teham savijnanam idam vaksham yasheshataha yajnatva neha bhuyonyad jnatavyam avashishyate. So Krishna is claiming, I'm going to tell you jnana and vijnana. After knowing this, there will be nothing left to know. So whatever he says next must be the core. Otherwise, you can't make this claim. So you're making a claim that whatever you will learn, that's the end of it. Meaning that is the real essence, or that is the core of it. Yajnatva na iha bhuyaha anyad jnatavyam avashishyate. Nothing will be left to learn beyond what I will be teaching now. And what is it that he teaches very next? So those are the verses that are just a couple of verses later in the same 7th chapter. Aham kritsnaste jagataha prabhava pralayastatha. So he is saying, I am the creator, destroyer for this whole world. Then he is saying, mattah parataram nanyat kinchidasti dhananjaya. There is nothing beyond me. And this verse is very important. We'll come back to that again. And then he says, Mai sarvamidam protam sutre manigana yuva. Just in a, like the, in a thread, all the ornaments of the manis, everything is embedded in me. So I am the anchor for all these objects. So these are the things that Krishna says in the 7th chapter. So this must be the essence of the Gita, which is nothing but what is claimed in bold there. And then again, in the 9th chapter, Acharya gives these quotes again, because the beginning of the 9th chapter says, I'm going to tell you, idam tute guhyatamam pravaksham yanasuyave jnanam vijnana sahitam yajnatva mokshase shubhat raja vidya raja guhyam. Then it continues, pavitram idam uttamam, etc., etc. So what's the claim at the beginning of 9th chapter? I'm going to tell you something which is very secret. Guhyatama is understood in 2 ways. One is as secret and the other as essence, because something that is core is also secretively positioned. Therefore, Guhyatama also refers to the Tatparya, and it also refers to something which is not easily revealed to everybody. So Guhyata, I'm going to tell you something which is Guhya. And it is also Raja Vidya, Raja Guhya. So it is it is not just a common Vidya, but it is, Raja here refers to the supreme Vidya, and it is supreme Guhya. And what is that? Maya tatamidam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina matsthani sarva bhutani nachaham teshvavastitah. Again talking about his complete control over everything. Then there are a few more verses on very similar lines in 10th chapter and in 11th chapter, which is just after Vishwarupa Darshana. Arjuna says, na tvat samosti abhyadikah kutonyaha lokatrayepya pratima prabhava. This is while seeing the Vishwarupa. Arjuna says, there is no one who is equal to you. Na tvat samaha asti abhyadikaha kuto anyaha. And there is obviously, who can there be who is superior to you, while I am not seeing anyone who is equal to you. So because of that direct vision, so Acharya is quoting this as a support to claim sarvottamatva, because Arjuna is seeing. Arjuna is not just seeing Vishwarupa, he is also seeing that I'm seeing everything, and nobody else that I am seeing is actually at a level that is equal to you. So forget about someone who is better than you. And Krishna's final claim in the 12th chapter, that Tesham aham samudharta. So mrityu samsara sagarat, nobody else. Therefore, moksha is possible only by Vishnu Jnana and Vishnu Paramya Nishchaya. So that is the summary verses that Acharya has quoted in Gita Tattva. Yeah, please.
Yeah. See, he says Guhyatamam, here he says idam te Guhyatamam.
Yeah.
Right? This is the secret of secret. Right?
Correct,
Top
correct,
secret, right?
correct, correct.
This is one hand, but here we are saying it is secret, but it is widely available across all the places.
Correct, correct. Yeah. So therefore, the couple of interpretations that I gave for secretive is not in the sense of physical secrecy. It is in 2 possible ways to understand. One is that it is the essence, and that's how Yadavarya Tippani in Bhagavata talks of, I forget the verse to which he's commenting, but for the specific word Guhyatama, he says it is referring to Tatparya. So when you say that this is the Guhyatama Vichara, it means this is the Tatparya of this section. That's not necessarily a physical secrecy in that sense. So that is one way to look at it. And the second is when you say this is the secret that I am revealing to you, we already know how multiple misrepresentations and misunderstandings have actually led to complete distortion of this. So secrecy is still remaining secrecy unless we have the help of Acharya. So in that sense, it continues to be a secret, I believe. So
Yeah. First one is really more interesting because it says Guhyatavam.
yeah,
What you're referring is the
it is the core.
Yeah, core meaning of that.
Core meaning, correct. So I'm going to tell you something that is the core of it. And after making that claim, Krishna is talking about Maya Tatamidam Sarvam Jagadavyakta Murtina. So that is the core of all the Vidyas. And it is all, he's also qualifying that as Raja Vidya, Rajaguhyam. This is the most secret thing, and this is the supreme Vidya. What is that supreme Vidya? To know his Sarvottamatva, the Sarvaguna Purnatva, Sarva. Correct, exactly. In fact, Acharya quotes that also as the very next, because it was not in my 6 chapters, I deleted it. In fact, just after this, correct. So, Iti Guhyatamam, 15th chapter also, because that is also about the, correct.
So, Acharya explained about Sarvaguna, etc.
Yeah.
So, when he's studying those characteristics, when he's quoting, is he quoting any quotes which are ideologically different with other ideologies?
Meaning, in this section?
Anywhere. This section, if it is there, you can highlight it.
Well, not in this section that I'm aware of, but in multiple other granthas, he has discussed the potential conflict with what he is saying and how to resolve that. And that's a
second chapter, actually. Second chapter, 15th book or 14th book. That's not just for Bharata, where.
Yeah, he talks about all the Tattva-masi Shrutyartha, Aham Brahmasmi Shrutyartha, everything at that point. Yeah.
One question is like, see, for example, they are Maya Tatamidam Sarva
Jagad Avyakta Murtina. Yeah.
This is a very straightforward line.
Yeah.
Very straightforward line.
Correct.
Basically, essentially say that I am there everywhere. I am the God.
Correct. Correct.
How can a Mayavadi get mistake of it? That is very interesting. I don't want to get into all of the details. Maybe to elaborate for this. That is a thing which is always hitting my brain. How can someone mislead?
True. Oh, no. I mean, so they're clever enough to to say that well, these are all the things that, I mean, when Arjuna can be degraded as well, these are the things that Krishna is telling for people like Arjuna, not for us. So you can expect what are the other potential. Okay. So now so I'll not go into all the verses, obviously. So we have hopefully got an overall picture of what are the things that are happening in these 6 chapters and what are the main verses that have an implication for the Siddhanta, especially the ones that Acharya has quoted at the beginning of Gita Tatparya. So a few verses that have some significance and where Acharya has also given elaborate commentaries. So I'll try to touch upon a few of them. So this is in the beginning, we have discussed this multiple times. So there is this, so this Mattah Parataram Nanyat Kinchidasti Dhananjaya is an important verse for a couple of reasons. One, again, this has been misrepresented by others as saying there is nothing other than Mattaha Parataram Na Anyat Kinchidasti. So other than me, there exists nothing. So this is one interpretation that people have done. So Acharya has said to please look at each word carefully. It is saying Mattaha. It is not saying Mattaha Anyat Nakinchidasti. It is saying Mattaha Anyat Parataram Nakinchidasti. There is, so how do you account for the word Paratara if you are just about to say that there exists nothing, he's saying there exists nothing that is supreme. So therefore, so you either say mattaha parataram nasti, or you say mattaha anyat nasti. But if you say mattaha anyat parataram nasti, it means mattaha anyad asti kintu natat parataram. So there are other things, but they are not paratara. So that is the message of this. So here, when there is a usage of the word, so that is one part of the story. The second is, why is Krishna using this word paratara? Because paratara, if we translate crudely in English, it would mean something like greater. No, para, paratara, and paratama, great, greater, and greatest. So why? I mean, he should have ideally used paratama, not paratara. I mean, if you say paratara, then it seems there is someone else who is paratama. So what's the meaning of that? So Acharya gives this very interesting classification in Gita Tatparya. He says, well, there is obviously an important meaning to what Krishna is saying. See, when you have only two in reality for comparison, then it doesn't matter whether you say paratara or paratama, because there is the superlative form, that greatest, or if you say greater, it means one and the same. They mean one and the same if there are only two objects that you're talking about. And the reason why we say there are only two objects is, what is this paratva? Acharya says dukkha asambandha. So those who never have any contact with dukkha are the para. And there is only one person like that, that is Lakshmi. And therefore, there is only para Lakshmi Devi, and paratara is Vishnu. And here tarap and tamap mean the same thing, because you don't have any other object for comparisons. And when you don't give a comparative object or an object with which you are making a comparison, then tarap actually means tamap. So tarap and tamap do not carry any additional meaning in this context. So paratara Vishnu is fine. Then, but there is an interesting follow-up question that anybody would ask. Okay, why is this paratara, para? Okay, what is avara, avaratara? Para is great, greater. Then, okay, then we need some more clarity on other positions and who are they. So Acharya lists all of these, though this is not there explicitly in Gita. Acharya says, okay, paratara means Paramatma, para means Lakshmi Devi, and then there is Madhyama, who is Vayu. And why is he Madhyama? Because he has the dukkha sambandha, but he is dukkha asampiditatvattu madhyamo vayuruchyate. He is not affected by dukkha, though he is in physical contact with dukkha. So and therefore you can't put him in either of these buckets, and therefore Madhyama. It's not para in the real sense, because there is samsara, but he is not suffering because of the samsara. There is no impact of that, and therefore he is Madhyam. Then he gives another group called para abhasa, who are like para, that is the muktas. So after liberation, the jivas are also like Lakshmi in that sense, that there is no dukkha sambandha, but they're not in the real sense at all times, and therefore they're not para, but they're para abhasa, like para. Then avara is those that have dukkha sambandha, that is jivas, and also the jada, because it is the one that gives that dukkha. So dukkha sambandha is there in that sense, though it is not experiencing that dukkha. And therefore, the next group called avaratara is actually worse than jada, because jada doesn't have the experience of dukkha, whereas tamo yogyas have the experience of dukkha all the time. So avara and then avaratara. So this is a scheme that Acharya provides based on the and that seemingly innocuous small sentence there, mattah parataram nanyat kinchidasti dhananjaya. And then this is another interesting and important part that Acharya explains. What is this Vijnana? So Krishna has claimed, I'm going to tell you about Jnana and Vijnana. So Krishna initially told about Jnana, which is that, I am the creator, I am the, aham sarvasya kritsnasya prabhavah pralayasthatha mattah ityada. And then also that he also has mentioned a couple of other things while talking about jnana, which is that there are two prakritis. One is chit prakriti and one is achit prakriti. So that is Lakshmi and the material raw form, which are responsible for this creation. And both of them are under my control. And so it is like, so Acharya gives this description that it is like Pitru, Matra, and the material which becomes the body. So those are three different things. So Pitru is the Paramatma, Matra is Lakshmi Devi, Jada Prakriti is the raw material which actually gets converted into body. So the body is obviously not the transformation of either Pitru or Matra. It is a Jada. It's a non-living entity, Prakriti per se. So you have all three: Pitru, that is Paramatma, Matra, that is Lakshmi Devi, then Jada Prakriti, which is this Deha. So, and then he's saying, I am the supremost among these things. So this is about Jnana. Then what is it that is Vijnana? So here, this is I would say, one of the very important aspects in both Gita Bhashya and Gita Tatparya to understand. Because Vijnana, Krishna has said that I'll talk about Vijnana. And then he gives this list. Nobody understands what is this in relation to Vijnana. He's saying, I am the rasa in water. I am the prabha, that is the light or the radiance amongst the Shashi and Surya. I am among the Vedas, I am Omkara. I am the sound in Akasha. So those are actually the essential features of those elements. The sound is the essential feature of Akasha. Rasa is the essential feature of water. Gandha is the essential feature of Prithvi. So Krishna is saying, I am that Gandha. I am this Tejas in Agni. I am the Jivana among all entities. I am Tapas among Tapasvis. So he's claiming that those essential entities are me. So this is, as was being asked some time ago, easily misinterpretable words, statements saying, okay, Krishna is saying he is that. So Acharya gives, well, I mean, there are multiple reasons why it shouldn't be interpreted as identity, that I am the taste in that water. That's not the meaning. So there are 4 or 5 ways in which Acharya explains what this means. One, he is Apsu Rasaha. He is Rasa in water. He is called Rasa in water. And what is the term Rasa mean? What does the term Rasa mean? Rasayati iti Rasaha. The one who gives taste is called the Rasa. So he is controlling the Rasa of that Rasa in water, and therefore he is called Rasa. It doesn't mean he is that Rasa. So that is one. And the second, he is also the Bhokta of that Rasa, which I discussed earlier, as a Sarabhoga in the kind of Swachya Rasa Bhoga. So in every element, there is this core entity, which is his own other form. So that is the other thing that Krishna is referring to. And the third, he is talking about an idea which is very interesting. So Sri Jaitirtha explained this in Prameya Deepika also. When let's say somebody is doing a pot and he creates a pot, and there are some features to that pot which are inherent when you call something a pot. So it should have a water carrying capacity. It should have some shape, etc. Those are not created by this guy independent of the creation of pot. When he makes the pot, all of these are embedded in it. So it's anushangika. When you do something, there are a few properties that are embedded and inherent to it. So you don't have a control over those properties beyond the control that you have over the entity. So the entities and the properties are inherently connected. So you have control over the entity and not over the property. Acharya is saying Krishna's claim here is that he is different in that aspect. He's not only controlling the entity, but he's independent of the entity, controlling the property of that entity. So Rasaha Aham Apsu refers to, I am the taste in water. meaning I am not just the controller of water, I am also the controller of its core entity called rasa. I am Prabha amongst Shashi and Surya refers to, he is not just controlling Shashi and Surya, he is also controlling what you think is the core quality of Shashi and Surya beyond his control of Shashi and Surya. So he is abadi natu abadi niyamanubadhaha. Just the water is under his control, and therefore it follows that everything else is under his control. So it is not following from that. It is an independent relationship to the property of that object that he is controlling. So this is what I was referring to earlier as the Vijnana is in the details. So Vijnana is in opposition to Jnana, which is just a general understanding that he is doing everything. This kind of detailed analysis of and understanding of what he is actually doing is what is understood by the term Vijnana. Yeah, please.
Why it is important?
So that is the what we discussed earlier as the difference between Traividya and Bhagavata. So knowing Paramatma as supreme, but not understanding his role in each and every element is what distinguishes a Bhagavata from a Traividya. I mean, there are many other distinctions, but this is one of them. And this is, well, Krishna is claiming that unless you know this, you don't get the real Jnana and Moksha. And therefore, it is important to realize this.
Krishna is the controller of water.
Yeah.
Very grossly saying.
Yeah.
Very crudely saying.
Yeah.
Inherently, it means he can control the rasatva of water.
Yeah, so that is exactly what Acharya is trying to problematize. Is it because he's controlling the water, and therefore, as a consequence of that, or as a corollary to that, he's controlling rasa, or is it that he's controlling the rasa independent of that?
Everything is dependent there, right? Why?
True.
When Narendra Modi does everything in the nation, in addition to that, he is also very excellently managing cross-border terrorism, and very important thing. Yes, very important thing that no one else did. These are the regular things which other PMs also do. So in that way, the one specific thing is highlighting the activity of our Prime Minister. Like that is Krishna is telling you, like this rasa is a very poor entity that tells about the particular being's greatness, be it sun or moon. Other things are general things. Maybe that Vishesha and Samanya Nyaya is big.
Well, but that, so it's not about what is important in that object. It is about his relationship with that essence of that object. So he's not talking about,
as the other he told, his relationship is there from the very minutest thing to the very vital.
correct, but is that relationship via the object, or is that relationship directly with that property?
You told about entity and property.
Property, yeah.
Right? So what you are saying is, Krishna has an independent control on the entity
And then the property, yeah.
and he also has independent control on the property.
Yeah.
Right? Now, the difference is, if he has an independent control on the entity, it means that he has an independent control on the entity, the property itself. See, he has a control on the pot.
So the example that or the counter example that I gave earlier, when somebody who is making a pot has a control over the pot, does he have an independent control on the water carrying capacity of the pot? My understanding is not. And I mean, I won't be able to explain what does it mean to have an independent control over the property. I have no clue.
Unless you are saying that, see, for example, water has rasatva today.
Yeah.
Like hypothetically speaking, okay, Krishna overnight decides that what the rasatva should not be the rasatva what you are visualizing today. Come 12 o'clock midnight tonight, I make a decision that rasatva is no longer the rasatva; it will be something else, some gandhatva of the water.
Yeah.
Unless you are saying that level of
well, I mean, so that is true. In fact, Acharya says rasadi swabhavanam rasa saranam niyanta. So he is controlling the nature of that object in a way that it remains the nature of that object. So, if you say that
Water is water, earth is earth, like that.
correct. But the question to which I don't have an answer is, can we think of a counter example where there is an element called water that does not have rasa, and therefore what Krishna is controlling here in terms of rasa is something that is beyond just the water. So there is, I mean, our understanding is limited by what we have conceptualized.
No, why can't we say that due to rasa only water is there?
And therefore, yeah, so that is the problem. Due to rasa only there is water. Now, when you are controlling water, you naturally control rasa. What is the additional control you have over the rasa?
Unless Krishna is able to manipulate the rasa.
No, he is of course able to manipulate, and he doesn't. I mean, so what Sri Jaitirtha says that he doesn't manipulate, and therefore, but the idea is
Like this, something in the morning session we discussed this regarding the why Mahabharata is greater than Vedas.
okay.
So because what is there in Veda is in Mahabharata. What is
True.
what is Veda? What is in Vedas is in Bhagavad Gita. So
Sure.
due to Bhagavad Gita is much more than Mahabharata. Like
True.
that, if you compare going all that, the overall in nutshell, what happens is what is within is controlled because the other outer version is also controlled by him.
Yeah, no, but that is what we are trying to negate. It is not because he is controlling the water, is he controlling the rasa. He is controlling water and rasa.
He
I-
is rasa himself. No, he is not rasa himself.
No, that is at a different level. That is the swakhya rasa. That is what he is consuming,
Yeah.
which is himself. But that is a different rasa. Here, rasa is at very multiple.
Water has a rasa property. Now, water is a jada, has a property called rasa.
Correct.
So, Krishna has an independent control on water
And
and
rasa.
rasa.
But can
Correct.
those two be separated?
Yeah, so that is what we can't
Because of
concept. I mean, you can do just a thought experiment that okay, there is something called swarupa of water, and there is a property of that which is the rasatva or rasa.
Water is only Varuna.
The essential properties are inactive also, like in Pralaya. So he gets them to be active. That is why it is called Paradya and Sikha active. So during Pralaya, even those essential attributes are dormant. Therefore, his control on that during Srishti is explicit when he says Rasom Apsukamte.
That's a
Yeah.
potential explanation.
That is why it is big. Yeah.
Now, can we interpret that rasa is, especially that rasa is in my Adhyana, Krishna's Adhyana. Therefore, it is in his Adhyana during the Srishti, it is dormant. He makes it to go to dormant
Hmm.
in the Pralaya.
Hmm.
So therefore, he is specifically controlling the rasa. So it is, to be said, rasoham also, it is, rasa is in his Adhyana.
Correct. No. That we are agreeing to by default. But what is it that when everything is under his control, why is he specifically saying rasa within water is under my control?
Maybe there is some external of rasatva to other so other way.
Hmm.
It is the rasatva is mixed to some other part of
Hmm.
something. So that is there is some control over that too for the mixing happenings. So probably there is separate control over it.
No, I mean, but I think the interesting question that you earlier asked and mentioned is about our ability to differentiate the two and to see them. I mean, even rasa is natu abadivat abadi niyama agantuka, natu abadi niyama anubadha. So you have the water, you are controlling water, and as a corollary, you are controlling its rasa. Is what we know. But what we are saying here is not that, is what Acharya says. We are saying that there is an independent control beyond controlling the object. And that's the Vijnana. Yeah.
At least it's very logical. But
Sure. So there are a couple of more things that that are discussed here. One is, he says, Punyo Gandhaha Prithiviyam. And why only Punyo Gandha? All Durgandha is also under his control. So Acharya says this is for Upasana. So while doing Bhagavad Upasana, you're not supposed to, of course, he is present everywhere, but there are ways in which you see him, where do you see him, etc. And one important qualifier is that you see him in the right, good objects. So Punyo Gandhaha Prithivya. Similarly, so, and he says, therefore, you have to add that as a qualifier everywhere. So Punyo Rasaha also, so, and things like that. And then Balam Balavatam Chaham Kamaraga Vivarjitam. So those are also very similar to Punyo Gandha. So he is Bala among the Balavans. But what kind of Bala? It's Kamaraga Vivarjitam. Sri Jaitirtha explains in Nyayadipika, generally Bala is used either for Kama or for Raga. So you have some desire, or Raga here refers to an unacceptable desire, whereas Kama is in general desire. So you have some desire and therefore you are using your force to acquire that. That's not the kind of Bala that Krishna is talking about. This is the natural Bala in someone, which is devoid of Kama and Raga. So in such Bala, it is me. It is me can be understood, as I said, in multiple ways. One is just understanding the term Bala. It is Ba and La. Beti Jnanatvavachi. Jnana and Raga. Tadragitvat. Jnana Ragi. So there is a term for Bala that can be interpreted to mean the guna of Paramatma. So that is one way of looking at it. There is another way, which is that Bala is under my control. And the third is to say that you see me in Bala. So that is for Upasana. And the fourth is to say that he is consumer of that Bala. So he is the bhokta of that Bala. So those are the multiple ways in which this Vijnana is to be understood. Then comes the question, okay, if this is how you are, why is it that none of us are seeing you like that? So there is an interesting explanation to that, which is Tribhir Gunamayair Bhavair Edhis Sarvamidam Jagat Mohitam Nabhijanati Mamebhya Paramam. People are crude to paraphrase what is being said here. They have a kind of what's in modern terms called a grounded logic. So their logic is grounded in what they are seeing on the ground. It is so therefore, in fact, Acharya says, Gaunan Brahmadi Dehan Drishtva. So they are accustomed to seeing everything as made of matter. They are accustomed to seeing everybody as physical. So they don't get this idea of understanding something which is completely aprakrita. So when you are so much engrossed and engaged with Prakriti, what I am seeing is very difficult for you to understand. So Tribhir Gunamayairi Bhavaihi Yebhihi Sarvamidam Jagat Mohitam Ato na Abhijanati. Vasudevadikan Drishtva. So Vasudeva is known to have this kind of a body. Therefore, Vasudeva must also be like that, is how people understand me. And therefore, this Maya is playing a big role in obstructing your understanding to what I said just before as Jnana and Vijnana. That is a Daivi Maya. And that Daivi Maya is an important descriptor, because it is not just Maya which you can overcome on your own. It is Daivi Maya. That means it is under my control. So I am actually operating that Maya to behave in this way. So therefore, you have to come back to me, and only then will that Maya go away.
But does it mean that God is partial? See, you always, if you want to visualize one of the very fundamental attributes of Brahman, you say he's impartial.
Yeah.
Right? He's impartial to everyone. Do whatever he read what you
Correct.
So whatever you
Correct.
But now he is saying Daivi Maya. I have actually created this Maya for him.
Yeah.
So I am obstructing you.
Yeah. And he's also giving you a solution as to how it can be.
So why to create a problem and why to give a solution?
Yeah, I mean, but that's a much larger debate on which can go into questions on Jiva Kartrutva, etc., etc. But the point here is that you have a you have explained what Jnana and Vijnana are, but we are not seeing like that. There is a Maya that is obstructing, which is the reality. The question is, I mean, what you're asking is an important question, but we all know that there is a reality that Krishna is describing, and there is also a reality that we are unable to see that. So our explanation should be in tune with that, what we are seeing. And I mean, what you are asking is a question beyond that, which is, why is this reality like this? So, but that will get into a little more other questions.
So this is like the typical politician way of doing things. Wait till the problem goes. Then what would have cut at a very small crossroad, they wait for the tree to be there. Then they cut the tree and then
but sadhana, so without the completion of sadhana, giving moksha can also be interpreted as partial. So therefore, it is one way of enabling jiva to go through this sadhana marga. And what is that sadhana marga? This Maya is swabhava jnana in our siddhanta, that it is not something that is created in the first place, which is there with the jiva from anadikal. So therefore, the sadhana of jiva is in separating that Maya out and getting the revelation of the Paramatman.
He's like now, Krishna is now becoming the farmer or the gardener. He is like asking you to blossom. He's just putting everything, it's up to you to blossom.
Correct. In fact, the next couple of verses actually make that exact point, to say that Namam dushkrutino mudhaha prapadyante naradhamaha mayaya apahrita jnanaha asuram bhavam ashritaha. I have told you that this is the problem, and I have also told you the solution to go to resolve this. However, there are some people, dushkrutinaha mudhaha naradhamaha mayaya apahrita jnanaha asuram bhavam ashritaha, they don't come to me. Namam prapadyante. But there are others. Chaturvidha bhajante mam jana sukrutinarjuna. There are people who actually follow this path. So, in a way, as a response to your question as to is Krishna being or Bhagavan being partial, well, these are the raw materials out there, and these are the solutions, and these are the paths and the problems. There are few who choose, and there are few who do not. There will obviously be follow-up questions as to, okay, that choice is also under his control, but that's what I said as a much longer discussion on Jiva Kartrutva. Yeah.
Very specifically in the previous slide, Krishna is pointing us to two things. One is the Trigunatmaka Jagat, other one is the Sachidananda Parabrahma, which is Krishna himself. You leave that, come here, you will like leave that, or if you just come to me, you will easily tarantite. So they will easily cross over. So he's making very clear distinction of the two broad categories, which is the one Trigunatmaka and Sachidananda.
Correct.
Jagat and Brahman.
So then he goes on to say, who are the people who actually come to him? So there are 4 types of people. Artho, Jignasur, Artharthi, Jnani cha Bharatarshava. The one who is suffering, the one who is a seeker, then those who are in need of some wealth or some solution materially, and the Jnani who knows me. And obviously Krishna is partial towards the Jnani. Priyo hi jnanino atyartham aham sacha mama priyaha. And Acharya gives a very interesting meaning to the word Atma here, because I mean, this is again something that is potentially mistranslatable. Jnani to Atma iva memata. So Krishna is saying Jnani is Atma. So is he saying that, okay, once you get that Jnana, you become one with me? So Acharya says, Apnoti iti Atma. Atma is the one who attains something. So Jnani comes to me, Jnani attains me, while all 3 are in that process, or they are the people who come to my bhakti, in the path of bhakti. Unless you become Jnani, you won't attain me. So we have already described that Maya is the obstacle. So you have to come to me, and coming to me can be for multiple purposes. However, if you go choose the most significant path of Jnana, then you actually come to me. That is my prapatti. Yeah. So Then, so this is what we have briefly touched upon. Then, okay, you're saying there is Bhagavan, which, as you mentioned, can be categorized as, okay, one is Satchidananda and the other is Jada Prakriti Trigunatmaka. So we know about him. Why is it that, okay, one explanation is you said some do not actually engage in this kind of Sukruta. So they keep doing other things and therefore they don't come into this path. But even those who come in your path are actually not getting liberated, many of them. So what is this going on? So this is the point where, so Acharya's interpretations are very helpful, where it is mentioned that it is not just the Sarvottamatva Jnana or Samarpana at the end that is sufficient, but so this those three differentiators are very important. Ananya Devata Yagat, Bhaktyudrekat Akamanat, Sada Yogacha Vaishishtyam, Trividyat Vaishnavada. So Trividya and Vaishnava are two different categories. Trividyas are also engaging in Vishnu Puja in addition to other Devata Pujas. They also know Vishnu Sarvottamatva. They also do the Samarpana at the end, but they are not doing the way in which the Vaishnava does, which is Ananya Devata Yagas. He doesn't worship any other Devatas with any particular purpose. So he sees them always as the Parivara of Vishnu. He doesn't go into any of the Devatas, go to the worshipping any of the Devatas independent. Second, this is the Bhagavata. Bhagavata is Vaishnava. So Bhagavata is Ananya Devata Yag. So he doesn't go to any other Devata as the primary goal, but always sees them as the Parivara of Vishnu. And the second, Bhaktyudrekat. So why does he do that? He knows that differentiation between the Paramatman and these Devatas. So he has this Ananya Bhakti in Vishnu and Yatha Yogya Bhakti in others. And Akamana, he doesn't have any other Kamana than pleasing the Lord. Sada Yogacha, and this is important because even the Trividya does Samarpana at the end. But Acharya is saying that is insufficient. You have to be aware of his control on everything at every point in time. So to one of your questions earlier as to why do we need to know that okay, he is controlling rasa or he is controlling. So that is the description of a Vaishnavatva in a sense, where you actually are aware of Paramatman's activities and role at every point in time and in every micro detail. And that is the definition of a Bhagavata or a Vaishnava. So even though the Trividya may have a broad understanding of Vishnu Sarvottamatva and the requirement to do Samarpana at the end, that is insufficient. So they also do so they're tempted by other things. Kamaistaistai Hrutagnyanaha Prapadyante Anya Devataha. And I actually enable them to do all of that, and I actually give them the required fruits, but they are always in this cycle, but they won't come to me finally. So Antavattu phalam tesham tadbhavatyalpamedhasam, they may reach the required goals and the results that they are thinking of, but they don't come to me. And unless they come to me, this Maya is not going to go away. So Madbhakta yanti mamapi, and then we have to circle it back to what the Maya is doing.
This difference is dealt in detail in 9th chapter.
Yeah, correct. This quote that I gave is from Gita Tatparya 9th chapter, and this is from 4th chapter Gita Tatparya. In the 4th chapter also there is a big description on what are these Trividyas, etc. Oh, why is this?
The one Dr. Srinidhi V. That's not this.
So the conclusion at 7th chapter is for Jara Marana Mokshaya Mama Shrikta Yatantiya. This is what I was referring to as the teaser for 8th chapter. So he's saying, oh, those who come to me for the purposes of liberating themselves from this cycle of birth and death. And there is a big note that Acharya gives, that doesn't mean that you have to go to him only for that purpose. There are others like the Ruju Devatas and the Tatvika Devatas who go to him for no other purpose. For them, purpose is not Jara Marana Moksha, but purpose he himself. So if we say that Jara Marana Mokshaya Mam Ashritya Yatanti, it is not that he is prescribing you to come to him for moksha. He is just saying that there are people who come to him for moksha. I support them. That doesn't mean that it is important to actually ask for moksha, because there are others of a much higher caliber who don't even ask that. So for them, it is only to attain or to please the Lord. Narayanarthe, natu tadartham anyat. So he is not for something else, but he is the goal in himself, as the goal in itself. For us, Lord is a kind of an intermediate goal to attain moksha. Whereas for the Uttamadhikaris, Paramatman is the goal himself, not to attain moksha, but independently, irrespective of what he does. So therefore, this Jara Marana Mokshaya is not a prescription, but is an accommodation. So even if you are coming to me for Jara Marana Moksha, I will help you. Huh? No, I said it is accommodating. So he is, okay, for the Akamana, no, that one is dealt in other chapters where Moksha Kamana is not seen as a Nishiddha Kamana. So,
Akamana is Nishiddha Kamana.
Correct. And that which comes in conflict to moksha. Yeah. So, how are we doing on time? 4:50. So, 15 minutes. Okay. So then I'll go to the. Okay, the 8th and the 9th we have, I mean, all of these we are covering in a spiral multiple times, but I'll go into the more at the end of 9th chapter, there is an interesting problem. So this is where Suduracharopi bhajate. So even if you are a Sudurachari, but you are doing my bhakti, then you should be treated as sadhu. Sadhureva samantavya. This is coming in the context of importance of bhakti. So Acharya gives an elaborate commentary and explains that this should not be misinterpreted and misread to see that, okay, Durachara is okay. So if you are, so in fact, Sri Jayatirtha provides a very interesting avatarika. Yeah. So this is a very often quoted verse. Apichet suduracharo bhajate ma mananya bhat sadhureva samantavya. So in fact, Sri Jayatirtha gives a context to this, saying if we have the chakra shankha dharana, that's the word that he uses, and are therefore projecting ourselves as Vaishnavas. So we have Vishnu Bhakti. I mean, how else would we be wearing these chinhas? So if we do that, which is an indicator of bhakti, Durachara should be forgiven. Is that what Krishna is trying to say? So Acharya says this is said in the context of Deva Devarshadi Vishayeshveva etat. The Devamsha Vishayeshveva etat. This is not a general prescription or a general rule, but there are few people, especially among the Devatas, they would have done some, adhika punya in some other janma, and therefore they may be indulging in some durachara as a, so that's a consequence of their adhika punya, but their bhaktatva still continues, and therefore, so when they are bhaktas, even their durachara should not make you misunderstand that they are asadhus. They are sadhus. And if anybody is using this explanation to justify their durachara, they should be treated as dambhikas. Dambhikatvena anumeyaha. So if they are doing the Vishnu Bhakti seeming Vishnu Bhakti apparently, but are engaging in Durachara, then they have to be treated as Dambhikas, but not as Sadacharis. Why is that so? Acharya provides, which is currently also available, and a very important part of the Vishnu Purana called Yamagita, which talks about what are the parameters on the basis of which you should ascertain who is a Vishnu Bhakta. There, a lot of those things are actually about the Samanya Dharma, which is about Sadachara. So if you are, if you find some money lost and you're actually tempted to take that, then you are not a Vishnu Bhakta. I mean, it is as blunt as that. So that Vishnu Bhakti is also about these basic Sadacharas. So only then will you be considered a sadhu. And this Sudurachara exception should not be applied in our common daily understanding. So this is one important misunderstood verse that Acharya clarifies. And then there is a much more socio-politically significant verse, which says, Arjuna, if there are people who are Papa Yonis, Striyaha, Vaishyaha, Tatha Shudraha, even they, if they come to me and surrender, they will get moksha. And what to say of the Punyas, that is the Brahmanaha, Rajarshayaha, etc. So this is the apparent meaning of the verse, which will make a very clear allegation or a classification that there is Punya Yoni and Papa Yoni. And who are they? Punya Yonis are Purushas, Brahmanas, and Rajarshayas.
Those women who are Papa Yoni, that doesn't necessarily mean that all women are Papa Yoni.
Yeah. So that's the solution that Acharya provides. So, so the apparent meaning would be Punyaha and Papa Yonayaha. So these are the two groups. Punyaha are Brahmanaha and Rajarshayaha. Papa Yonayaha is Striyaha and Vaishyaha, Shudraha, etc. So Acharya makes a distinction that that's not the meaning here. Papa Yonayaha is a qualifier to the Striyaha, Vaishyaha, and Shudraha. So there is this idea called Swabhavika Varna and Aswabhavika Varna. So you may be a Brahmana by Swabhava, but may be born as a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or a Shudra because of Papadi. So Acharya then says it is not just Papa, it can be Kama, it can also be Punya, where there is a Shudra becoming Brahmana. So all of these are Aswabhavika Varnas. So even those who are naturally something else, but because of Papa, Punya, Kama, etc., are born in a non-natural yoni for them, even they, if they come and surrender to me, I am going to liberate them. What to talk of those who are anyway in the Swabhavika Varna? So this is not a classification of the Varnas per se as some being Punya Yoni, some being Papa Yoni. Naturality doesn't depend on anything. That's the term.
In Anadi Subhava, there are 4 categories.
Yes.
Even after Moksha, it will be there.
Yes.
Okay.
Even Purusha Stri is there.
Okay. Okay, we don't get to know.
I really don't know. So, but what, there is one exception or one caveat. Purusha can be born as a Stri, but Stri doesn't get, I mean, so Swabhavika Stri doesn't get an Aswabhavika Purusha Yoni. So that is there. So you can make a few guesses with that. But
It's impossible to determine any of us to say why we are here, what we are doing.
In Shudra here, in the samsara, does Kushika work and all that? So the same Shudra when he attains moksha, will you have to plow the fields in the moksha?
I think, I mean, Paricharyatmakam is the more essential part. It is correct. I mean, Prakruta also they can choose if they want to. Yeah.
I am actually interested about this Sudurachara. What is, see, you can say Apiche Durachara Bhajate.
Correct. And that is also discussed in the Bhashya. Because it is Sudurachara, please don't misinterpret it. Acharya says Duracharatva may be possible sometimes for some people and then they easily convert back. But if you are seeing someone who is Sudurachara, then making this inference that he may also be bhakta because we are seeing his bhakti lakshana should not be done unless he is a devangsha.
Ananya bhakti is there. You don't need to suppose. A normal bhakta can be okay. If you can misinterpret a normal bhakta, Durachari as a normal bhakta. But Ananya bhakti refers to the one who is true bhakta there, right? In the
Correct.
Gita verse itself.
Correct. No, that's the point. So what is it that Ananya Bhaktva refers to? So is it just the external indicators and can be applicable to normal people? I mean, how do we know?
When it is Ananya bhakti, you cannot apply it externally anyone.
Correct. That's correct.
So unless it is true bhakta only, Krishna
Correct.
uses
That's
that word.
That's correct. Okay. So one last point that we need to discuss. This is 9th chapter, last verses. So one last thing that we need to discuss is about the vibhutis. So Arjuna is requesting Krishna to show his, enumerate different vibhutis. And then Krishna starts and explains more than 20 odd different forms that he himself resides in. And this is very difficult to understand what this actually means. Adityanam aham Vishnu. There are Dwadasha Adityas. So I am Vishnu. Vishnu is also one of the Aditi Putras, and so in the Aditya category. So Adityanam aham Vishnu is understandable. Jyotisham Ravi Ramshuman. So among the Jyotis, those that light, provide light, I am Ravi. So is he saying that he is identical with Ravi? If not, how do we understand Adityanam aham Vishnu? Then there is Siddhanam Kapilo Munihi. Kapila is he himself. Kapila is Vishnu Avatara. So among the Siddhas, he is Kapila. That we can understand. Then he is saying Gandharvanam Chitraratha. So is Chitraratha also Vishnu Avatara? Yeah, Vedavyasa is also there. Then there are Pandavanam Dhananjaya. So is Dhananjaya also Vishnu? So those are first level questions. Then there are other questions that are, so for example, Vedanam Samavedosmi. Samaveda is actually not even not considered as considered as the most important among the Vedas. It is the Rigveda. And similarly, Ayudhanam aham Vajram. But Ayudhanam, so Sudarshana is considered the most important, and he's saying he's Vajrama. So how do we understand this? And then even more trickier is Shashi. Where is that? Nakshatranam aham Shashi. So Shashi is not even a nakshatra. So Chandra is not a nakshatra. So he's saying, I am Chandra among the nakshatras. So how do we understand these Vibhuti Rupas, and what is it that Krishna is trying to say? And therefore, again, Acharya is of help. And he's trying to say, okay, this Vibhuti Rupa, there are multiple types of Vibhuti Rupas. One is Pratyaksha and the other is Tirohita. Tirohita is where you don't see the Lord directly, but it is his presence in somebody which is providing the greatness to that object. So for example, when you say Pandavanam Dhananjaya, or more clearly, Rudra, Shankaraschasmi Rudrana. So Rudra, oh, there is a typo there. It is Shankara among Rudras, not Rudra among Shankaras. Anyway, so there are Ekadasha Rudras and Shankara among Rudras. So Krishna has his Vibhuti Rupa in Rudra. That is making him great among the category of Rudras. So that is one type of Tirohita Rupa, because it is not he himself. It is his presence in Rudra, in Shankara, that is providing him the greatness. Whereas the Vyasa, Kapila, Rama Shastrabhatamaham, Siddhanam Kapilo Munihi, Muninam Apyaham Vyasaha, Adityanam Aham Vishnuhu, all of these are Pratyaksha Rupas. So they are direct Vibhuti Rupas. So which is his own avatars. So one is Pratyaksha and the other is Tirohita. So among the Tirohitas, there are three types. One that is giving the greatness to one entity within that category, like Shankarashchasmi Rudrana. And the second is giving that greatness, or for him the lordship over others who are not actually in this category. So Shashi is controlling the nakshatras. That doesn't mean I am Shashi among the nakshatras. It means I am Shashi, who has the role of controlling the nakshatras. So that is the Vijatiya Swamya Prada is how Acharya. So it is not Sajatiya. It's the Shashi is not in the category of nakshatras, but Chandra is controlling the nakshatras, and therefore Paramatma's Vibhuti Rupa is in Chandra. And the third category is not a complete superiority within that category, but a partial or a within that group you make two groups, and you're the superior of one. So for example, Pandavanam Dhananjayaha is factually incorrect. There is Bhimasena who is actually the real Vibhuti among the Pandavas. So Sajatiya Ekadesha Swami. So even within that category, one subsection of that group is controlled by one person. And how did that person get it? It is because of Vibhuti Rupa of the Bhagavan. But so what is it that you're trying to say by making these kinds of classifications? So therefore, the final conclusion is therefore important. So that is, Vibhuti Rupa has a specific purpose of giving a greatness to that entity. And that, what kind of greatness may vary with the entity that we are talking about. If that entity is actually great among the whole category, then it is because of the Vibhuti Rupa of Bhagavan in that entity. If that is the second most important one, then it is again the Vibhuti Rupa of Bhagavan that is responsible for that. So this is actually a kind of an application of the Vijnana that we talked about earlier, that Lord is responsible for each of these positions of everybody, but he is making this, a kind of a generalized observation that wherever you see some greatness, it can be of any nature, any caliber. So the greatness within the whole category, or greatness for a part of the category, or greatness that is controlling another category, or he himself who has come in the form of some avatara. So all of these greatnesses are due to me, and they are due to my Vibhuti Rupa. So that's the essence in the, yeah. So I think we can, okay. So, I mean, we couldn't go into much more details of the 11th and the 12th. There are, I mean, we have covered some of the basics, but in summary, so the para and the apara tattva are so closely. Okay, I can spend a couple of minutes. So the question is, as we said, which upasana is better? Is it avyakta upasana or Bhagavad upasana? And what should we understand? What do we need to understand by the term avyakta is a very complex question, and Acharya has described in detail as to why avyakta should refer to Lakshmi. Vanamali Mishra gives a little different interpretation. While acknowledging that this is what Acharya says, he says this is talking about Bhakti Marga versus Yoga Marga. Which of the two is preferable? And so Krishna is more in favor of Bhakti Marga, whereas Yoga Marga, I mean, more in favor meaning it's an easier path to, but the explanation that Acharya has provided is between Bhagavad Upasana versus Lakshmi Upasana. Why is the Lakshmi Upasana more difficult? So Acharya provides this interpretation or an explanation that klesho adhikatarastesham pruthak shriyam upasana. So you can do Lakshmi Upasana, but if you do that separately, then it is adhikatara klesha. It is not prohibited, but it is going to take much longer time. And as we discussed earlier, it requires much more indriya samyama, much more long-term action, and activities that are much more ritualistically challenging. So all of these are involved in Lakshmi Upasana. So therefore Bhagavad Upasana is preferable. So that is a little clear. And then Krishna goes on to describe, okay, therefore follow my path. If you are unable to do this kind of a concentrated upasana, what are the other options? So at least try practicing. This is an interesting step-by-step approach. Atha chittam samadhatum nashaknoshi mai sthiram abhyasa yogena tato mamichhaptum dhananjaya. If you are unable to concentrate, start practicing. Abhyasepi asamarthosi. if you are not able to even practice, at least start doing the vihita karma that is required for you. So you are unable to practice the dhyana, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be involved in vihita karma. So once you do more and more of swavihita vritti, then you get this ability to practice more. And if you are not able to even do madarthamapi karma, atha etadapyashaktosi kartum madhyogam sarvakarma phalatyagam tatah kuru yatatmavan. If you are not able to do even the swavihita vritti, at least start developing this vairagya. Acharya says this is actually a kind of an arthavada. It doesn't mean that you can actually live in a way that you don't do swavihita vritti, but just do tyaga. That doesn't work. But you start from vairagya, then you can get into some swavihita vritti. So you get the engagement with swavihita vritti better, and then you can slowly start practicing dhyana, and then you can do the Bhagavad Upasana more clearly. So the significance of vairagya, that karma phala tyaga, is what Krishna is trying to emphasize. And then, so what are the other things that a bhakta needs to have? Adveshta sarva bhutanam, maitrah karuna evacha, nirmamo nirahankaraha, samadukha sukakshami. These are all the properties of a person who is in this journey of becoming a bhakta and a upasaka. We can note that the term yo madbhakta same priyaha, yo madbhakta same priyaha actually occurs multiple times here, which is to emphasize the significance of bhakti in addition to having all of these qualities. As we discussed earlier, you may have done dana, yajna, tapas, etc., but without bhakti, their potential comes down. So adveshta sarva bhutana, maitrah karuna evacha, all of these are important, but bhakti is more central to all these aspects. So it's actually a very short chapter, 20 verses. In fact, the shortest, the 12th and the 15th are the shortest among the Gita. So it is talking about the significance of bhakti and the role that one needs to engage in the process of developing Bhagavad Upasati Marga, and the importance of Bhagavad Upasana versus Lakshmi Upasana. So in summary, starting from Jnana, Vijnana, and then in the Vibhuti Yoga, we didn't touch on Vishwarupa much. So in all of these, there is a very strong and a closely connected relationship that Krishna is talking about between that Paratattva and the Aparatattva. To such an extent that sometimes people have misunderstood this to mean that both are same. It is the Brahman and the Jagat, or the Brahman and the Jiva. He's saying that his role is so intertwined with the entities here that he is in charge of almost everything. In fact, everything. So to come back to what Acharya said as the summary, Krishna has therefore established that Sarvasya Bhagavad Adhinatva. So because everything is under his control, doing Paramadharma primarily includes Swavihita Vritti, Bhakti, and Bhagavad Aradhana. And therefore, this whole Shatka fundamentally proves the Vishnu Sarvottamatva as the main idea. So with that, if there are any questions, else we can stop. So Shriman Madhva Mahacharya Padapadmaika Satmanam Anunam Mahatam Chapi Bhavatat Karunamai. This is in fact the last verse in Padmanabhatirthiya Gita Bhashyatika. So and is profound in the way he has composed it. I mean, he's saying, we know Padmanabhatirtha is a direct disciple of Acharya, and he's saying, I need the karuna of everyone, those who may be small to me. Anunam Mahatam Chapi. If they are Madhva Mahacharya Pada Padmaika Satmanam. So if for them the only abode is Acharya's Pada Padma, then I need the blessings of people who may be younger to me if they are surrendering to Acharya with that devotion. Shri Krishna.
second session. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, again we are meeting here. Please come with your friends and relatives to fill the hall. Actually, the purpose of direct session is done only to interact, have an interaction and with the scholars, so scholars, and get more knowledge, more enrichment of the project knowledge what we have. So that is the purpose. I request all of you